16. Day 1. Obey the law. Day 2. Rob a bank. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Gwen's mouth hung slightly open. She watched in disbelief as the dust, illuminated by the sunbeam, hung in the air for a moment, still perfectly in the shape of the heavy bag, before slowly dissipating. Hawk stood his ground, slowly exhaling a breath before turning to face her. At that moment, Gwen's gaze shifted back to him. Their eyes met. Looking at him, forehead glistening with a light sweat, clad in a white tank top that accentuated his powerful physique, hands wrapped in tape, Gwen felt a strange, indescribable feeling. Hawk, on the other hand, was just surprised to see her here. Can I help you? Nope. Gwen shook her head. With her hands behind her back, she started walking toward him, taking in the surroundings of the old gymnasium she hadn't visited since the new one was built. The new gym has air conditioning. Why don't you train there? Hawk thought for a moment. It's quiet here. It is, isn't it? Gwen nodded, accepting his explanation. Hawk watched as she walked over to the bench where he'd left his backpack and sat down, a look of confusion on his face. Are you sure you don't need something, Gwen? I'm sure. Gwen, leaning back on her hands, smiled at him. I had some free time, so I thought I'd come and watch my friend train. Hawk raised an eyebrow. He looked at her smiling face and felt like there was something more to it. But, whatever. Training was more important. He shook his head, pulled his focus away from Gwen, and turned back to the heavy bag, ready to finish his daily 10,000 punch routine. He'd been almost done, after all. Then Gwen walked in. And now, he had to start all over again. Hawk took a deep breath. He didn't draw on his Cosmo, relying only on his physical strength to complete the task. As for Gwen, if she wanted to watch, let her. This was a public gym. He couldn't exactly kick her out. He had no right to. Soon, as Hawk began to throw punches again, the rhythmic, impactful sounds of his strikes echoed through the old gym once more. This time, however, wanting to finish quickly, he subconsciously picked up the pace. One punch, then another, and another. And then, the afterimages appeared. Sitting on the bench, Gwen felt her vision blur. She stared, dumbfounded, at the storm of phantom fists that had materialized before her. What's happening? I didn't even blink, she thought, instinctively pulling her phone from her pocket and aiming it at Hawk. Hawk, still focused on his training, caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. No videos. Oh. Gwen heard his voice, calm and steady, even though he hadn't stopped or even looked in her direction. She blinked, wondering if she'd imagined it, but lowered her phone anyway. A little while later, the storm of fists gradually faded, and Hawk's movements came to a stop. The old gym fell silent once more. He unhooked the heavy bag from its chain, swung it with one hand, and tossed it effortlessly back into the corner. Then, with Gwen's eyes still on him, he walked to the bench, pulled a towel from the side pocket of his backpack, and looked at her. He hesitated for a second, then asked again, Are you sure there's nothing you need, Gwen? Gwen nodded. There is. The corner of Hawk's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. But Gwen caught it. She smiled. Not wanting to tease him any further, she got straight to the point. They're doing the headcount for this year's prom. Are you going? Midtown Tech might be an elite private school, but it still had all the usual dances and parties, homecoming, masquerades, and of course, prom. Gwen asked him every year. And every year, Hawk said no. He was a lone wolf. He preferred quiet. He hated loud, crowded places. That was the polite way of putting it. The real reason was much simpler. He was broke. He didn't have money for a tux, he didn't have a car, and he didn't even have a license. He couldn't exactly walk his date home after the dance. And most importantly, he didn't have a date. Why would he go to prom alone? To watch couples make out and feel miserable. This year was no different. No. Hawk shook his head without a moment's hesitation. He'd rather be on his rooftop, watching the stars, than go to some stupid dance. It was quiet. And it was free. Save where you can, spend where you must. He was legally independent now, which meant no more federal aid. Between renting a new place and buying basic necessities, his savings had taken a serious hit this week. He was even starting to think that his idea of buying a car had been a bit reckless. He had already given up on that plan. It was better to keep some money saved for emergencies. Besides, the school bus had a stop near Queensbridge Park. Who needed a car? He didn't even have a license. He couldn't drive it even if he bought it. Maybe I should just rob a bank. I need money to buy that meteorite, after all. No, wait. If I'm already planning on stealing something, why not just steal the meteorite directly? Why bother robbing a bank? I'm not going to rob a bank just to use the money to buy a stolen meteorite from some rich guy. That's just stupid. Hawk's thoughts began to drift. He was now seriously considering the feasibility of just stealing the meteorite. The Wakandans were never going to give him their vibranium willingly. He'd probably have to steal that too. So if he's stealing the vibranium, and he's stealing the meteorite, what's one more bank robbery on top of that? Gwen watched as Hawk, after shaking his head about prom, suddenly seemed to zone out, a distant look in his eyes. She was curious. What are you thinking about? Robbing a bank. Quote. Gwen's eyebrow arched. Hawk snapped back to reality and looked at her. Their eyes met. A moment later, a thoughtful, amused expression crossed Gwen's face. So, which bank are you planning to hit? I'd recommend the Pacific Standard in the 19th precinct. Hawk frowned slightly. Is that one an easy target? No. Gwen's smile was radiant. But my dad's the captain of the 19th precinct. Hawk fell silent. After a long moment, he looked at Gwen with a dead serious expression. I was kidding. Okay, new plan. If I ever do rob a bank, I'm staying the hell away from the 19th precinct. Gwen's smile widened. She stood up from the bench, but just as she was about to say something, her phone rang. Mrs. Snow. Hawk. Okay. I know where he is. A moment later, Gwen hung up and looked at Hawk. Come on. Mrs. Snow is looking for you. Hawk. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. 17 The original Spider-Man comes online bonus. Thank you for 500 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Mrs. Snow. Full name, Selena Snow. She was the guidance counselor for the 11th grade. Her responsibilities ranged from providing personal, social, and emotional support to guiding students through their academic development and college applications. Unlike counselors in public high schools, who were often responsible for hundreds of students, Midtown Tech was a private school. Mrs. Snow was in charge of only 35 students. This allowed her to provide more in-depth, personalized support to each of them. And in another coincidence, she was the counselor for both Hawk and Gwen. However, Hawk, who had been hoping to grab a quick shower and change into some clean clothes, was now being hurried along by Gwen to Mrs. Snow's office. On the way, he glanced at her curiously. Did Mrs. Snow say what it was about? No, she just asked if I knew where you were. And if I did, to find you and bring you to her office. Really? Hawk thought for a moment, then looked at Gwen. You think it's about college? Did your early acceptance and scholarship from Berkeley come through? It was the only reason he could think of for Mrs. Snow to want to see them both together. After this month, when school started up again in September, they would be seniors. They would graduate next June. But the top students had usually already locked in their preferred universities long before then, and the universities had locked in their preferred students. Like Gwen, who had her heart set on UC Berkeley. Located in California, Berkeley was a public research university, often called a public Ivy. It had produced over 100 Nobel laureates, the third most in the world. Gwen shrugged, then looked at Hawk. What about you? Still set on NYU for law. You're not even considering Stanford. NYU's law program was good, no doubt. But everything is relative. Compared to Stanford, at least in the field of law, NYU was completely outclassed. So Gwen didn't quite get it. I heard Mrs. Snow say she recommended you prioritize Stanford. There's no way I'm getting a scholarship from Stanford. Hawk shrugged back. As they walked, he explained, NYU is a different story. I might not get a full ride, but I'll definitely get some kind of scholarship. And if I have that, I can negotiate a better interest rate when I take out student loans. Yep. It was that simple. He'd love to go to Stanford for law. He'd even love to go to Yale and see if he could get tapped for a certain secret society. But it wasn't just a matter of wanting to go. Even if he got in, the tuition at Stanford or Yale would crush him. Hawk was a realist. He was going to have to take out loans for college no matter what. So why not choose a school that was more likely to give him a scholarship and reduce the total amount he'd have to borrow? He had no desire to still be paying off student loans when he was 50. Of course, that was his plan from before he awakened his Cosmo. And now, he had even less desire to go to Stanford or Yale. NYU was fine. And besides, he was familiar with New York City. His main goal was to live a comfortable life, so staying in his comfort zone seemed like a pretty good idea. Gwen frowned slightly at Hawk's almost flippant explanation. She was about to say something, but then she thought about his situation, 17 years old, no car, no house, no phone, and decided to let it go. Soon, they arrived at Mrs. Snow's office. Knock, knock. Come in. Mrs. Snow's voice came from inside. Gwen pushed the door open and smiled at the woman sitting behind the desk, Mrs. Snow, a kind-looking woman in her 40s with glasses perched on her nose. Mrs. Snow. Gwen, have a seat. Hawk. Mrs. Snow smiled and gestured to the sofa, then her expression softened into a sigh as Hawk followed Gwen into the room. Once again, Hawk, you really should get a cell phone. It was just too inconvenient not to have one these days. When he'd first started at Midtown, Mrs. Snow, knowing his situation, had even offered to give him a spare phone. But Hawk had refused, promising he would get one soon. And then, from his first day of 9th grade to now, the end of his junior year, every time Mrs. Snow asked about his phone, Hawk would give the same answer. Sure enough, this time was no different. His response wasn't just similar to his previous ones, it was a perfect copy and paste. I'll get on it as soon as I can. You always say that. Mrs. Snow looked weary. She was about to press the issue when there was another knock on the door. A moment later, another familiar face walked in. Hawk, who had just sat down on the sofa, raised an eyebrow as he saw who it was. Peter Parker. But for some reason, the Peter Parker standing before him now looked different from the one he had seen in the locker room. How to put it? This time, Hawk saw a hint of Bully Maguire in him. To be more precise, if the Peter he'd seen before was just Peter Parker, the one standing here now felt more like the superhero, Spider-Man. The Tobey Maguire version. The original Spider-Man. Yes. Even though this was the MCU, and technically Spider-Man should be the Tom Holland version, the Peter Parker he was looking at was a dead ringer for Maguire's. It was strange. He couldn't figure it out. Mrs. Snow. Peter. Mrs. Snow's face lit up as Peter walked in. Wow, Peter, it's only been a few days. You look like you've bulked up. It was true. If the old Peter was a beanpole, the new Peter was a young bull. Peter just scratched the back of his head and gave a shy smile. Then, his eyes fell on Hawk, who was sitting on the sofa. He froze, as if he'd been struck by lightning. Hawk was looking right back at him. Their eyes met. And Hawk saw it, clear as day. The moment Peter's gaze landed on him, Peter's pupils rapidly contracted and then dilated at an insane speed. Yep. No doubt about it. Peter had undergone the change. The real one. The original Spider-Man, the one who didn't need tech to shoot webs from his wrists, had successfully come online. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 12 comments 0 vote. 18 Oscorp and the Daily Bugle bonus. Thank you for 600 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Spider-Man. No. The spider has finally come online. Hawk watched Peter's pupils rapidly contract and felt a sense of satisfaction. Truthfully, the reason he had stayed out of the fight in the locker room and ignored Peter on the bus wasn't just because he wanted to avoid the tragedy that always follows superheroes. It was also because he didn't want his interference to prevent the original Spider-Man from ever existing. There were 3 versions of Spider-Man. And Hawk's favorite, by far, was this one, the one with the Bully Maguire face. Having processed all of this, Hawk looked at Peter Parker, who was still staring at him as if in a daze, and was the first to speak. Afternoon, Peter. Quote. Afternoon. Bully Maguire snapped out of it, his expression reverting to its usual mild-mannered look. After greeting Hawk, he turned to Gwen. Gwen had seen the intense look that had passed between Hawk and Peter. It piqued her curiosity, but she pushed the thought aside and smiled. Hey, Peter. I heard you gave Flash a run for his money yesterday. The previous day at lunch, Peter and Flash Thompson had caused a scene in the cafeteria. Gwen hadn't been there, but she'd heard from others that Peter had been like a completely different person, leaving the jock utterly humiliated. Peter didn't say anything, just scratched his head and smiled. Gwen took the hint and didn't press. She just gave him an encouraging thumbs up. It's about time you fought back. Good for you, Peter. Peter's shy smile grew wider. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Mrs. Snow clapped her hands together. Peter, have a seat. Once Peter had taken a seat on the sofa opposite Hawk and Gwen, she walked back to her desk and picked up 3 folders. After a moment, she handed one of the folders to Gwen. A summer internship offer. Lab assistant in Dr. Connors' lab at Oscorp Industries. Gwen's eyes lit up as she took the folder. Thanks, Mrs. Snow. Dr. Connors just told me yesterday that he'd be in touch with the school. I didn't expect it to be this fast. She could have gotten the internship without the official paperwork, of course. But having this on file would look great on her college applications. Mrs. Snow then looked at Hawk and Peter. I have 2 other summer job offers, but I wasn't sure which one you'd prefer, so I figured I'd just call you both in and let you choose. As she was about to continue, Hawk raised his hand, interrupting her. Wait, Mrs. Snow. What is it, Hawk? I'm still not sure why I'm here. Quote. Mrs. Snow blinked, then looked at Hawk's genuinely confused expression. Did you forget our conversation in my office last month? Hawk's eyes widened slightly as he tried to recall their last one-on-one counseling session. It had been a routine meeting. Except, right as he was about to leave, Mrs. Snow had asked him about his plans for the summer, if he was looking for a job. Hawk had told her he hadn't found anything yet, and Mrs. Snow had offered to help him look. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but had agreed. After all, he really hadn't found a summer job yet. As the memory returned, Hawk drew in a sharp breath. Mrs. Snow chuckled at his expression. Remember now? Yeah. Hawk nodded. Mrs. Snow smiled, then got back to business, holding up the 2 remaining folders. One is also from Oscorp, a summer position in their bioelectricity department. They need someone to help with filing and data entry. The other is from the Daily Bugle. They're also looking for a summer intern. Neither job sounded particularly glamorous. And they weren't. But if you were to just walk in off the street, both Oscorp and the Daily Bugle would tell you they weren't hiring. These weren't just 2 job openings, they were favors for Mrs. Snow. In other words, the only way to get these jobs was with the official paperwork she was holding. Peter Parker instinctively looked at Hawk. Hawk, you want to choose first. Hawk was about to tell Mrs. Snow that he wasn't planning on working this summer, but then a thought struck him. He changed his mind mid-sentence. I'll take the one at Oscorp. He had just remembered the paper by Dr. Connors on gamma radiation. This was perfect. He had been trying to figure out a way to meet with Dr. Connors, and now, an opportunity had just fallen into his lap. Peter, seeing that Hawk had made his choice, looked at Mrs. Snow. Then I'll take the Daily Bugle. I like taking pictures. You sure do. Hawk thought to himself, hearing Peter's words. Mrs. Snow didn't care about their internal thoughts. Seeing that they had both made their choices, she handed them their respective folders and gave them their instructions. Peter. Yeah. When you go to the Daily Bugle, ask for Mr. J. Jonah Jameson. Just give him this folder, and he'll get you set up. Okay. Hawk. Mrs. Snow. When you get to Oscorp, go to the Bioelectricity Engineering Department and ask for an engineer named Max Dillon. I'll call his supervisor ahead of time to let them know you're coming. Got it. Hawk nodded, his expression unchanging, though the name registered. Max Dillon. Isn't that the guy from The Amazing Spider-Man 2? The nobody engineer who thinks the whole world ignores him, falls into a tank of electric eels, and becomes Electro. Hawk shook the thought from his head. He was far more interested in Dr. Connors' gamma radiation research than some future villain. After all, he had a feeling that the gammonium he was looking for was directly connected to whatever Dr. Connors was working on. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 23 comments, 0 vote. 19. Spider-Man talks a lot, but this one doesn't. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Soon. With their business concluded, the three of them stood up, said their goodbyes to Mrs. Snow, and left the office. Gwen immediately turned to Hawk. Do you want me to show you where the bioelectricity department is when we start? No, I can find it myself. Hawk replied, then immediately started walking away, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't have much time. His afternoon classes were about to start, and he needed to hit the gym for a quick shower first. Peter, who had followed them out of the office, watched Hawk's retreating back. He stared intently. Gwen, who had been watching them both, suddenly spoke up. Peter. Huh. Peter looked at Gwen, his eyes a little unfocused. His pupils quickly adjusted, and he snapped back to the present. Gwen. Gwen smiled. It's nothing. Hey, are you going to prom this year? Peter gave an embarrassed smile. Sorry, I probably can't make it. If Hawk wasn't going to prom because he was broke and didn't have a date, Peter was skipping it simply because he didn't have a date. But the reason Hawk didn't have a date was because he couldn't be bothered to find one. If he wanted to, with his looks, his physique, and the quiet confidence forged from years of training, he could easily find a girl willing to go with him. Peter, on the other hand, just couldn't find a date. To be more specific, it was because he was hopelessly hung up on Mary Jane Watson. Mary Jane, Peter's next-door neighbor, was also in their grade. Peter probably thought his crush on her was a secret, but pretty much everyone knew. And since everyone knew, no girl was going to agree to be his date just to be Mary Jane's stand-in. And the real Mary Jane wasn't going to say yes. Peter had no desire to go to prom alone and watch the girl of his dreams dance with someone else. Gwen wasn't surprised by his answer. She was friends with Mary Jane. The moment prom was announced, Mary Jane had come to her and put her and her date's names on the list. Harry Osborn. Yep. He fit Mary Jane's usual type. Gwen thought to herself but didn't say anything more. She just nodded and turned to leave. But, as she walked away, a thought occurred to her. She glanced back over her shoulder. Peter was still standing there, staring in the direction Hawk had gone, a lost look on his face. A few days later, a roar of celebration erupted from Midtown Tech. Summer vacation was finally here. Liz, you got your summer plans locked in? Yep. Hawaii, here I come. Tom and I are going to Slovakia. Slovakia. Dude, did you not see the news? What? Last week, a bunch of tourists went missing there. As the final bell rang, students poured out of the school in groups of 2s and 3s, excitedly chattering about their vacation plans as they headed for the parking lot. Cars started up, and one by one, they pulled away. In no time at all, the entire campus felt deserted. The usual cacophony of the school day was gone. The only sound that remained was the rhythmic thudding coming from the old gymnasium. About 10 minutes later, the sound stopped. Hawk stood in the center of the gym, steadying his breath as he began to unwrap the tape from his hands. Even though he could now punch a steel plate without so much as reddening his knuckles, the habit of 1,000 days was hard to break. He still taped his hands before every session. Just as he was finishing, his eyebrows shot up. A moment later, a voice came from behind him. I heard they're turning this place into a swimming pool next semester. Peter. Hawk turned to see him standing there, the face of Tobey Maguire. It's not a rumor. It's true. Peter just smiled and said nothing. This was another reason why Hawk preferred the original Spider-Man. Compared to the slight motormouth of the Andrew Garfield version and the hypertalkative techbro of the Tom Holland one, he preferred the original's quiet intensity. Just like him. All substance, no flash. Not one for small talk. Hawk tucked the used tape into his pocket. You didn't come all the way here just to tell me they're renovating the gym, did you? Peter quickly shook his head. No. Then what is it? Peter looked like he was about to say something, but the words caught in his throat. He just stood there, hesitating. Hawk smirked. He looked at Peter's conflicted face, then turned and walked toward his backpack. He slung it over his shoulder and started for the exit. Have a good summer, Peter. Thwip. Hawk, who had almost reached the door, heard the telltale sound of a web shooter. He spun around, his right fist already lashing out. Peter, whose spider sense had screamed a warning, instinctively dodged to the side. The next second, crack, one of the wooden benches in the middle of the gym exploded into splinters. Peter's eyes went wide as he stared at the shattered bench. Hawk, meanwhile, was peeling the web off his backpack. It was sticky. He had to flick his wrist a few times to finally get the wad of webbing off. Peter had already recovered from his shock. He looked back at Hawk. Hawk, are you? I'm not. Hawk cut him off, his gaze sharp. He had gotten this strong through his own relentless, day in and day out effort. Of course, his cheat might have played a small role in it. But not much. Hawk was convinced that even without it, he would have awakened his Cosmo eventually. Now that his power system was gone and couldn't argue, he was sticking to that story. But that wasn't the real reason he had cut Peter off. Hawk gave a subtle glance toward the gym entrance. With his spider sense, Peter understood instantly. Hawk smiled. Have a great summer, Peter. See you next semester. Quote. Yeah, see you next semester. Peter swallowed the words he had been about to say and nodded. Hawk said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the gym. And then, he saw Gwen standing right outside the door. A look of genuine surprise crossed his face. Gwen. Gwen. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 7 comments 0 vote. 20 then was then, this is now bonus. Thank you for 700 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk looked surprised. Gwen looked back at him, her expression deadpan. Fake. So fake. She couldn't help but offer a sincere critique. You're a terrible actor. Sorry. Hawk shrugged. I'm not a professional. It was true. Gwen had been outside for a while. To be more precise, she had arrived just as Peter was about to confront Hawk. She'd stopped when she heard the commotion inside. Gwen thought she had gone unnoticed. But, after awakening his Cosmo, Hawk's 5 senses were heightened to a superhuman degree. He could hear a leaf fall from a tree behind the gym if he wanted to, let alone Gwen's footsteps. The same went for Peter and his spider sense, especially this version of Peter, who was the genuine, mutated article. Though Peter had probably just gotten his powers and wasn't used to them yet. Plus, Hawk's punch had left him in a state of shock. But with Hawk's subtle signal, Peter had quickly caught on, his senses picking up Gwen's breathing just outside the door. So, they had both, in a moment of unspoken agreement, shut up. This was yet another reason why Hawk preferred the original Spider-Man. He had no comment on the Andrew Garfield version. But the tech-based Spider-Man. Hey. Hawk had no doubt that if it had been the Tom Holland version in there, the kid wouldn't have understood his signal at all. He probably would have just kept babbling on and on. No, not probably. Definitely. Hawk thought to himself. Just then, Peter emerged from the gym. He saw Gwen standing there and put on a look of mild surprise. Gwen, you're still here. Gwen looked at the stiff, unconvincing surprise on Peter's face and finally lost it. Peter, you're acting as even worse than Hawk's. Ha ha ha. Peter's expression froze. He just scratched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. He mumbled a quick goodbye to Hawk and then hurried off toward the school gate. Seeing his cue, Hawk prepared to leave as well. He had to be at Oscorp early tomorrow for his first day of work. He planned on getting to bed early tonight. Gwen stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Something's different about you, Hawk. Huh. Hawk blinked. Gwen's brow was furrowed, her eyes searching his. Since when are you and Peter so chummy? I've never even seen you talk to him before. To be more accurate, she had never seen Hawk make small talk with anyone. Even when other students tried to talk to him, he would just give a few short answers and go back to doing his own thing. And then there was the prom situation. At first, some girls had actually worked up the courage to ask him to be their date. The result. As the rumor among the girls went. Hawk. He's a mountain of ice. A 10,000-year-old mountain of ice. That was how the other girls saw him. And Gwen was no exception. She thought about the times she had tried to talk to him. Even though he never said it, she could always feel this invisible wall, this resistance to their conversation. But today, her intuition was telling her that the wall was gone. The resistance she always felt when talking to him had vanished. She was curious. Hawk listened to Gwen's assessment and explained with a relaxed tone, "Peter and I aren't friends. He just came to thank me. I was there when Flash cornered him in the locker room." Gwen fell silent again, listening to his explanation. After a moment, she looked him straight in the eye, a slight smile playing on her lips. "If you don't want to tell me, you don't have to. There's no need to lie." Hawk thought for a second, then met her gaze. He gave a slight nod. "Okay. I don't want to tell you. I'll figure it out on my own." "Go for it." Hawk nodded, ready to leave. But just before he turned, he paused and looked back at her. "Just be careful. You know what they say. When a woman gets curious about a man, that's the beginning of the end." Gwen was now certain that the wall between them was gone. But she just scoffed playfully. "I don't think I'm in any danger of falling for a guy who can barely admit that we're friends." She remembered the look on his face a few days ago when she'd given him a ride home and told him they were friends. No, wait. Even then, the wall had already started to come down. Gwen replayed the scene in her mind, and a thought struck her. Hawk didn't argue. He just shrugged and started walking down the stairs. "See you around, Gwen." Gwen called after his retreating back, "I'm going to find out your secret." "Good luck." Hawk waved over his shoulder without looking back. He didn't give it another thought. That line about a woman's curiosity was just something he'd said on the fly. But he probably wouldn't have said something like that before he'd awakened his Cosmo. Sitting in the back of the school bus on the way to his new apartment, Hawk stared out the window at the passing scenery, lost in thought. Before he had his power, love was a luxury. A luxury he could never afford. But now, courage comes from confidence. Hawk still didn't have any money, but he had his fists. Strength is power. Power is currency. By that logic, to have strength is to have wealth. So, then was then. This is now. With his awakened Cosmo, he had finally earned the right, from a position of strength, to believe that love was something he could have. Hawk thought to himself. Just then, the image of Gwen looking him in the eye flashed in his mind. He felt a sudden, sharp pang in his chest. Hiss. Hawk snapped out of it, shaking his head to clear the sudden thought. It was nothing. Just the three biggest delusions, warning system kicking in again. He wasn't Peter. Peter would see Mary Jane smile at him once and convince himself she was in love with him. Hawk wouldn't make that mistake. So, forget it. Time to focus on what's important. Tomorrow was his first day at Oscorp. He would finally find out if Dr. Connors's lab held the key to the gamanium he was looking for. If it did, that would be perfect. Hawk already had a plan. Once he had confirmed the location of the gamanium, his next target would be the source of all vibranium, Wakanda. And the plan was simple. If Wakanda was willing to hand over the vibranium he needed, then everyone would be happy. But if they refused, and if they chose to fight back, then too bad for them. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 10 comments 0 vote. 21 The Oscorp building bonus. Thank you for 800 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The next day, Hawk was up early. Dressed and with his backpack slung over one shoulder, he took the folder Mrs. Snow had given him and headed for the subway. His original plan had been to take the bus. Everyone knows the New York City subway is an experience you don't forget. But Hawk discovered there was no direct bus route from his new apartment to the Oscorp building. He'd have to make 3 transfers. At that point, he might as well just take the subway. At least with the subway, if you had no shame, you could ride for free. In a word, you could hop the turnstile. And even if you paid, the fare was still cheaper than the bus. So, the subway it was. Except, the moment he stepped onto the train, he regretted it. The smell. God, the smell. A sensory assault of indescribable odors washed over him from all directions. He shut down his sense of smell so fast it was practically a reflex. But the smell was only part of the problem. The car was a rolling circus. There was a wannabe rock star with a guitar, howling like a wounded animal, lost in a delusion of future stardom. Not far from him, a woman built like a Sherman tank had a massive python draped around her neck. God only knew how she got that thing on the train. But that wasn't even the main event. It's a well-known fact that if you were to list the most common places to get pickpocketed in New York City, the subway would be at the top. And right on cue, a young tough in a hoodie, his face shadowed, locked onto Hawk. His instinct screamed subway rookie. A subway rookie was someone who didn't ride the trains often, who didn't understand the unspoken dangers of the cars or the darkness in people's hearts. They weren't always rich, but they were always the easiest prey. Soon, the kid in the hoodie, pretending to adjust his headphones, bobbed his head to a silent beat and sidled up behind Hawk. The next second, as his hand came down from his ear, a small folding knife appeared in it. He was about to slice open the backpack on Hawk's back. Just then, Hawk, his back still to the kid, suddenly lurched backward as if he'd lost his balance. The kid, caught completely by surprise, was still fumbling with the knife. Hawk's sudden movement slammed the handle of the blade, flipping the point around. With a sickening squelch, the knife plunged deep into the kid's own wrist. Arg! The kid let out a strangled cry, his eyes wide with shock and pain as he stared at the knife buried in his arm. Blood began to drip, pattering onto the grimy floor of the car. The train pulled into the next station. The surrounding passengers stood up and filed off the car. No one gasped. No one cared. And certainly, no one asked the kid if he needed medical attention. Hawk simply moved with the crowd, stepping off the train without a single backward glance. As he walked away, he felt the burn of a hateful glare on his back, but he just let a small, cold smile touch his lips. He had been merciful. If this hadn't been a crowded subway car, if it had been some dark alley or deserted lot, he would have scattered the little punk's ashes to the wind. Could he not see that Hawk was wearing clothes that, all combined, weren't worth $50? He was this broke, and the kid still tried to rob him. Was there no justice? No law? Gwen. As he emerged from the subway station, still stewing over the attempted robbery, Hawk saw her. She was standing in front of the Oscorp Industries building, seemingly waiting for someone. Gwen, who had been scanning the area, spotted him across the street. Her face lit up, and she raised her hand, waving him over. Is she waiting for me? Hawk paused for a second, then darted across the street during a break in traffic. The Battle of New York had been 2 weeks ago. Now, looking around Manhattan, you could barely see any trace that an alien invasion had ever happened. That's the power of money for you. The battle ended in the morning, and the reconstruction of Manhattan, especially Wall Street, had begun by noon. The Oscorp building's facade had been heavily damaged during the attack. But now, you'd never know it had been torn open by the Chidori. Hawk glanced up at the massive skyscraper, which rivaled the Stark Tower 5 blocks away, then looked back at Gwen. Were you waiting for me? Of course. Gwen was dressed differently from her school attire. Today she had her hair in a high ponytail and was wearing the standard-issue white lab coat of a researcher. If I'm not here waiting for you, how else am I supposed to figure out your secret? Hawk just shook his head, a wry smile on his face. I don't have any secrets. Yes, you do. And I'm going to find out. Gwen said it with a completely straight face, then her expression softened back into a smile. Okay, I'm just kidding. Mrs. Snow called me this morning. She forgot you don't have a phone and was worried you wouldn't even be able to get in the front door without a security pass. So she asked me to meet you and take you up to see that. Gwen paused, looking at Hawk. Right, what was that guy's name again? Max Dillon. Hawk said the name of the future supervillain Electro, currently a superinvisible engineer. Gwen's face lit up with recognition. Right, him. Come on, I'll take you to the bioelectricity engineering department. Okay. Hawk didn't refuse. Gwen stuck her hands in her lab coat pockets and, with a flick of her ponytail, turned and led him toward the entrance. After swiping her own card, she said a few words to the security guard at the front desk. The guard looked over at Hawk, then nodded and manually opened the security gate. Once Hawk was inside, Gwen thanked the guard. A few moments later, Gwen, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew her way around, led Hawk to the bioelectricity engineering department on the first floor of the annex building. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 10 comments 0 vote. 22 The line that was meant to be crossed bonus. Thank you for 900 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk, check these readings. Oneo hate. Hawk, I've got to run down to the SL lab. Can you file the papers on my desk for me? No problem. Today was Hawk's 20th day as a summer intern at Oscorp Industries. And he still hadn't found an opportunity to get to Dr. Connors's lab. In fact, forget Dr. Connors's lab, in 20 days, he hadn't even set foot outside the bioelectricity engineering department. From the moment he clocked in to the moment he clocked out, he was busy. He was either reading data for someone or on his way to read data for someone. Or, like right now, cleaning up someone else's desk. Hawk watched the engineer hurry out of the office and walked over to the man's workstation. Even though it had been 20 days and he was no closer to his goal, he wasn't worried. For one, good things come to those who wait. And for another, this place might be a madhouse, but the pay was incredible. $800 a week, plus a free all-you-can-eat buffet in the 18th floor cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He might have briefly considered robbing a bank last month, but he hadn't actually done it. Most importantly, a line in the sand is meant to be crossed, but until he was forced to cross it, Hawk wanted to stay on the right side of it for as long as possible. Because he was afraid. Hawk had no idea what kind of person he would become once he finally broke his own rules. It's a well-known fact. Transmigrators are a species with a particularly flexible moral compass, and a deep, instinctual detachment from the people and events around them. Hawk was no exception. That was why he avoided socializing. Sometimes, when he looked at other people, he couldn't help but feel like he was looking at NPCs in a video game. It was a feeling of being the only sane person in a world of lunatics. The reason he was still willing to play by the rules, even after awakening his Cosmo, was simple. The values he'd been raised with in his past life were still ingrained in him. Be a good person. Or, if you can't be good, at least don't be evil. That was why, even with his incredible power, Hawk still lived a relatively humble life. Any other transmigrator, on the first day they got powers, would have probably declared themselves the new god of this world. The most important reason might just be that he was a genuinely good person. Unfortunately, Hawk had a feeling that this line he was so determined not to cross would have to be crossed soon, whether he wanted to or not. But until then, he was happy to follow the rules. Having been at Oscorp for a few weeks now, Hawk was familiar with the department's rhythm. He quickly organized the scattered papers on the engineer's desk, carried them over to the filing cabinet, and put them away in their proper place. Just then, the office phone rang. I'll get it. Hawk cut in, walking over and picking up the receiver. Bioelectricity engineering. Oh, Hawk. A familiar voice came through the line. Hawk raised an eyebrow. Gwen. He hadn't seen her since she had brought him to the department on his first day. He was busy. She was even busier. Even from his isolated post in the engineering department, Hawk had heard the rumors. For the past few weeks, Dr. Connors had been working like a madman. They weren't just ordering lab rats by the dozen anymore, they were ordering them by the crate. It was insane. Yeah, it's me, Gwen said. Hey, the voltage in our lab is fluctuating again. Dr. Connors wants you guys to send someone over to take a look. Okay, right away. Hawk hung up and relayed the message to the department supervisor. The supervisor, a 50-year-old man with a completely bald head and the zen-like calm of someone who had given up on life, glanced around the nearly empty office. Every lab on this floor is reporting voltage drops today. It's probably the resistors again. We just replaced them yesterday, whatever. What is your name? Take Hawk and go down to Dr. Connors's lab. Swap out their resistor. Hawk followed the supervisor's gaze to a man standing nearby, a quiet, unassuming man with dark skin and a gentle face. The future Electro. Yep. A genuinely decent guy. Max Dillon was a truly good person. He didn't have any of the sly, cunning traits that Hawk had come to associate with others. In the past 20 days, Hawk had seen it firsthand. If the Bioelectricity Engineering Department had an Employee of the Month award for hard work, Max Dillon would win it every time. If Max had even a shred of officepolitics savvy, he wouldn't still be the guy his own supervisor couldn't remember the name of. But Max himself didn't seem to mind. Maybe he was just used to being called, "What is your name?" He simply nodded at the supervisor's order and headed to the supply closet to get the parts. A little while later, Hawk was waiting by the department entrance when Max walked up. "Mr. Dillon." Max's entire body jolted, and his pupils seemed to contract. His voice trembled as he looked at Hawk. You know my name." Hawk smiled warmly. "Of course, Mr. Dillon." He had no intention of getting too close to the future Electro, but that didn't mean he couldn't be kind to the Max Dillon of today. A little kindness goes a long way. Hawk looked at Max, who now had tears welling up in his eyes. "Mr. Dillon, we should probably get going. Dr. Connors's lab just called again." Max snapped out of it and nodded eagerly. Right, let's go." Hawk smiled to himself and followed Max toward the elevators. Finally, a chance to get to Dr. Connors's lab. As they stepped into the elevator, Hawk looked at the floor indicator lighting up, a sense of irony washing over him. For the past 20 days, he had been racking his brain, trying to figure out a way to get into that lab. And he had failed, every single time. This wasn't the local grocery store. Did he really think he could just waltz into a lab that Oscorp had poured millions of dollars into? A lab that was on the verge of developing a revolutionary regenerative technology that could monopolize the market. But the moment he had decided to just let it go and let fate take its course, an opportunity had fallen right into his lap. Patience is a virtue. You can't rush things. Hawk silently reminded himself, completing his daily moment of self-reflection. Soon, the elevator doors opened. Gwen was already waiting for them. Her face lit up as she saw him step out. She rushed over. "What took you so long? Dr. Connors is about to blow a gasket." Before Hawk could even say anything, Gwen had grabbed his arm and was pulling him urgently toward the lab. Hawk was stunned. But as he looked past her, toward the lab at the end of the hall, his heart skipped a beat. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 19 comments 0 vote. 23 The Gammonium at last. Tomorrow, I'm launching a one-of-a-kind bonus chapters event. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Dr. Connors's regeneration lab was located on the 21st floor of the Oscorp building. The entire space was filled with a dazzling array of complex scientific instruments. Some of the equipment looked incredibly expensive, even to a casual observer. But the thing that truly captured Hawk's attention was right in front of him, visible through a large glass window, a strange, dark stone, housed in a transparent, climate-controlled case. Hawk didn't know what kind of rock it was. But his gut was screaming at him. This was what he had been looking for. A thought struck him. He turned to Gwen. "What is that?" "What?" Gwen looked up from where Max Dillon was working on the circuitry. She followed Hawk's gaze and then looked back at him. "Oh, that. It's gamma radiation." Quote. Gamma radiation. A question mark materialized over Hawk's head, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "My physics grades might not be as good as yours, but they're not bad. Since when can gamma radiation be a solid rock?" Gwen laughed. She glanced around, making sure none of the other lab techs were listening, then lowered her voice. "Do you remember back in September of '09, when the Hulk tore up Harlem?" Hawk froze for a second, then nodded. Of course. How could he forget? That day was burned into his memory more than any other since he'd arrived in this world. It wasn't just because his power had activated that day. There was another reason too. He remembered that day with perfect, painful clarity. Gwen shrugged. Then you probably know about the abomination. He was created using the Hulk's blood. Yeah. Hawk nodded again. Then, a thought occurred to him. He looked at Gwen, a sudden, wild idea in his mind. Are you saying that rock is the abomination? Of course not. Those rocks were brought in from the military base in Quantico. Gwen explained with a small smile, the Hulk. Dr. Bruce Banner, he was created in a Gamma Lab explosion. But something strange happened during that explosion. These rocks were dug out of the wreckage of that lab. Hawk was floored. Then why did you bring up the abomination? Oh. Gwen realized her mistake and shrugged. I just assumed you didn't know the Hulk was Bruce Banner. I mean, you don't have a computer or a phone. She trailed off, then another thought struck her. She looked at Hawk. That phone I gave you. Don't tell me you still haven't gotten a SIM card for it. Hawk pulled a sleek, iPhone 4-like device from his pocket. I did. Gwen had given him the phone on his first day at Oscorp, 20 days ago. He hadn't wanted to take it, but she'd given him a reason he couldn't refuse. Every employee had to clock in and out. Oscorp was no exception. And she hadn't given him a chance to say no, just shoved the phone into his hand and walked away. Hawk gave the phone a little shake, then steered the conversation back on topic, his eyes fixed on the strange rock in the glass-walled room. What's a rock from Quantico doing here? Because Dr. Connors' research is partially funded by the military. Gwen explained. To be more precise, most of Oscorp's major research projects had military backing. Some were even direct partnerships. Oscorp and the military had always been close. The company had started out as a herring cannery, but when the wars came, a young Norman Osborn had seen an opportunity. He'd sold off the cannery and converted the factory to produce weapons and ammunition. These days, Oscorp was out of the arms business, but they still maintained a very cozy relationship with the military. Take Dr. Connors, for example. His project was a joint venture between Oscorp and the Department of Defense. The lab was just housed here for convenience. After all, Dr. Connors had been a military surgeon before coming to Oscorp. Hawk nodded, finally understanding. Inside the glass-walled lab, a technician was preparing a vial of an unknown serum. Another was using a robotic arm to carefully lift the so-called gamma stone. What are they doing? A regeneration serum trial. The lizard serum. It was no secret that Dr. Connors was studying reptiles, trying to unlock the secret of their ability to regrow lost limbs. His research papers were all publicly available. But most of the scientific community was skeptical. There were a lot of reasons why. Hawk had never bothered to read them in detail. He'd never had any ambition to be a scientist, either before or after awakening his Cosmo. So, Gwen wasn't surprised that he knew about it. She just nodded. Dr. Connors thinks that combining the lizard serum with gamma radiation might be the breakthrough he's been looking for. Hawk nodded slowly, his eyes still on the stone being held by the robotic arm. An idea sparked. He looked at Gwen. Can I go in and get a closer look? He had to be sure. Gwen remembered seeing him reading that research paper in the library. Don't tell me you're actually interested in the stuff that turns people into monsters. Not the radiation. The rock. Hawk said, shaking his head. From a scientific standpoint, gamma radiation couldn't be stored. The moment it was emitted, it was gone. What's that? This is the Marvel Universe, and science doesn't apply. Okay, fair enough. Gwen thought for a moment. She decided that letting him get a closer look wouldn't spoil any of Dr. Connors' secrets, so she nodded. A jolt of excitement went through Hawk. As he followed Gwen toward the lab entrance, he called out to Max Dillon. Max, I'm just going to go check out that amazing rock. He didn't call him Mr. Dillon. Max had insisted against it. It seemed that just by knowing his name, Hawk had accidentally made a friend. Max looked up from his work, a gentle, good-natured smile on his face. Okay. I'm almost done here anyway. Hawk said a quick, thanks, and then followed Gwen as she swiped her keycard and opened the door to the inner lab. And then, the moment Hawk stepped across the threshold, the moment his eyes locked onto the gamma stone clutched in the robotic arm. Instantly, a message, clear and undeniable, surged through him from the depths of his Cosmo. That's it. That's the one. Gammonium. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. 24. A sudden accident bonus. Thank you for 1000 Power Stones. Here's your bonus chapter. Tomorrow, I'm launching a one-of-a-kind bonus chapters event. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. A gentle tap. Pa. The moment the stone in the transparent containment unit was fractured, a strange light, invisible to the naked eye but perfectly clear to Hawk, burst forth. And in that same instant, his Cosmo surged. The message was unmistakable. His Cosmo was telling him one thing. Gamanium. He had found it. As the information from his Cosmo settled, Hawk finally understood what gamanium was. A wry, almost exasperated smile touched his lips. The reason was simple. Gamanium, put simply, was stabilized gamma radiation. Once an uncontrollable energy, it had somehow condensed into a storable solid. That was gamanium. Yep. It sounded ridiculous. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that Hawk now knew where to find what he needed. Quantico. The lab where Bruce Banner was caught in the gamma bomb explosion. Gwen, who had taken on the role of temporary tour guide, saw Hawk staring intently at the fractured stone. She gently nudged him with her elbow. Hawk snapped back to the present and looked at her. His eyes were clear. What are you thinking about? Gwen's brow was furrowed. You're not actually thinking about turning yourself into a monster like the abomination, are you? She had seen the entranced look in his eyes and had gotten the distinct feeling that Hawk was contemplating leaving his humanity behind. Hawk pushed aside the sudden urge to bolt for Quantico and shook his head. Of course not. I was just wondering if Dr. Connors's experiment is close to a breakthrough. Gwen was about to reply. Just then, Dr. Connors, who had seen Gwen bring a visitor into the lab, walked over. He overheard Hawk's comment and chimed in, scientific progress is a long road of trial and error. But yes, I do believe we are on the verge of success. Gwen turned to greet him. Dr. Curtis Connors. Dr. Connors, also in a white lab coat but with only one arm, smiled and extended his left hand to Hawk. And you are? Hawk met his handshake with his own left hand. Hawk, I'm a classmate of Gwen's. I'm working in the bioelectricity department for the summer. I came over with Mr. Dillon, and I asked Gwen if I could see the lab. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Doctor. Dr. Connors laughed. I heard what you said to Gwen. Do you really believe my experiment can succeed? Hawk smiled back. I've read your papers, Doctor. It's clear that if your experiment is successful, it will be a tremendous benefit to mankind. It wasn't flattery, it was a fact. If Dr. Connors's regeneration research succeeded, it could mean the end of physical disabilities for the entire world. Of course, that was assuming he could actually create a regeneration serum, and not just the lizard formula that turned him into a monster. But that seemed unlikely to happen here. In the other story, Dr. Connors only became the lizard because of a push from Spider-Man. And while this Dr. Connors looked just like the one from the movie, there was no Andrew Garfield Spider-Man in this universe. There was a Spider-Man, sure. But he was interning at the Daily Bugle. He wasn't likely to show up here. So, the probability of this Dr. Connors becoming the lizard was probably lower than the probability of Max Dillon becoming Electro next year. Hawk chose his words carefully. He didn't say whether he believed in it or not, only that its success would benefit humanity. Dr. Connors was clearly pleased. He laughed again and, just before he walked away, he turned to Gwen. Gwen, feel free to show your classmate our current progress. It wasn't often he got such positive feedback. Besides, Gwen wasn't involved in the core research, and the progress was all unclassified. There was no risk of a leak. Gwen nodded. Once Dr. Connors was gone, she stood next to Hawk again and whispered, do you really think his experiment can work? Hawk was watching the technician who had fractured the gamma stone walk over to a centrifuge. He turned to Gwen. Just as he was about to shake his head and say no, he sensed something. He looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice. The next second, pop! With the sound of a bursting bulb, the entire lab was plunged into darkness. Thump! Holy! Squelch! In the sudden blackness, a series of sharp, violent sounds echoed through the room. Hawk instantly felt a wave of pressure rushing toward Gwen. Without thinking, almost on pure instinct, Hawk shot his right hand out, shielding her. Thwip! Quote. A sharp pain lanced through his palm. He gritted his teeth as the lab's emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a scary red glow. The scene they illuminated was horrific. A female lab technician lay in a rapidly growing pool of her own blood. She was clutching at her neck, where a shard of the destroyed centrifuge had embedded itself. Blood bubbled and frothed between her fingers. A few white lab mice scurried across the floor. Holy shit. Mia. Jesus Christ. Mia. The people in the lab, their faces pale in the red light, began to panic. Some ran out to get help, while others rushed toward the fallen woman. Gwen's eyes were locked on Hawk, who had quickly pulled his right hand back and hidden it behind him. Her gaze was sharp. She moved to stand directly in front of him. Show me your hand. What? Hawk feigned confusion. Gwen didn't say another word. She just reached out, grabbed his arm, and pulled his right hand out from behind his back, forcing it open. And there it was. Hawk's palm was completely unharmed, except for a small patch of skin in the center that looked brand new. Gwen stared, speechless. Hawk just smiled and pulled his hand back. My hand's not as pretty as yours. Gwen didn't reply, her brow furrowed in thought. Just then, Oscorp's paramedics and security team burst into the lab and began clearing the area. In the ensuing chaos, Hawk grabbed a dazed-looking Max Dillon and slipped out of the lab. Gwen remained standing just outside the door, her mind racing. She was certain she hadn't imagined it. The moment the lights went out, she had felt that wave of pressure, that sense of something moving through the air. It was gone in an instant, but she had seen it. In that split second, she had seen a few drops of blood fall right in front of her. But Hawk's hand was fine. Wait a minute. A thought struck her. Her eyes lit up. She walked back to the entrance of the lab and looked at the spot where she had been standing. There, on the pristine white floor, were a few distinct drops of blood. A lab mouse with a severed tail scurried over. It sniffed at the drops, then its eyes seemed to brighten, and it began to lick the blood from the floor. Shit. Gwen snapped out of it and rushed back into the lab. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 13 comments, 0 vote. 25 a girl's old phone and a girl's old laptop bonus. Thank you for 1100 power stones. Here's your bonus chapter. Tomorrow, I'm launching a one-of-a-kind bonus chapters event. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Evening. On the rooftop of the new apartment building. His workout finished, Hawk tugged at the hem of his shorts and sat down, leaning his back against the cool metal of the ventilation shaft. He grabbed a Coke from beside him and took a long drink. Just then, a thought occurred to him. He put the soda down and opened his right hand, palm up. The spot where Gwen had seen a patch of new skin was now completely gone, without a trace. After awakening his Cosmo, his strength, speed, and durability had all transcended the limits of a normal human. Even without burning his Cosmo, his strength could easily shatter boulders, demolish thick walls, and even bend steel. His speed, if he pushed it, could break the sound barrier. His durability was just as impressive. He could withstand impacts that would kill a normal person instantly, even without the protection of a saint armor. And if he did get injured, his accelerated healing allowed him to recover from fatigue and minor wounds far faster than any human. That piece of shrapnel from the centrifuge today was a perfect example. If he hadn't intervened, Gwen wouldn't have stood a chance. The shard would have killed her instantly. But that wasn't what was bothering him. The important thing was. Hawk replayed the moment in his mind, his left hand tracing the spot on his right palm where he'd felt the impact. He frowned, lost in thought. Just then, the phone lying next to him began to ring. Hawk snapped out of it, surprised. Since he'd gotten the SIM card, this was the first time it had ever actually rung. He answered. Hello. Yeah, it's me. Are you there? Okay, I'm on my way. He hung up. Hawk sprang to his feet. In a blur, his figure vanished, reappearing a moment later by the fire escape. He slipped back through his window, grabbed $500 from his backpack, and headed out. 10 minutes later. At the entrance to Queensbridge Park, across the street. Hawk stood by the gate, scanned the empty surroundings, then pulled out his phone and dialed the only number in his contacts. A moment later, the headlights of a parked van down the street flashed once. Hawk's eyes snapped toward the vehicle. The driver's side door opened, and a young Asian woman with long, thick brown hair, looking to be in her early 20s, stepped out. She held up a phone, showing him his own number on the screen. Hawk looked at her face and raised an eyebrow. Sky, standing next to her van, which also looked like her home, called out the agreed-upon code phrase. Faster than a speeding bullet. Hawk nodded. But not as strong. That was the signal. Sky didn't waste any more time. She pulled a laptop from the van and handed it to him. Just like we discussed online. 3 years old, but in great condition. I've already wiped it and installed a fresh OS. Check it out. If you're happy, you can pay me. Hawk took the laptop without a word. After all, this was a $500 transaction. If he had been a little less proud, he might have just asked Gwen if she had an old laptop he could have. Again, a line in the sand is meant to be crossed. He had already accepted the phone Gwen had practically forced on him. But, Hawk thought, a man's got to have some dignity. Still, he never would have guessed that the random seller he'd found on a used electronics forum this afternoon would turn out to be another major player in the Marvel Universe. Sky. The future Quake. Hawk shook his head at the irony. He opened the girl's old laptop and ran a quick diagnostic, confirming that it booted up and ran the basic programs without any issues. Satisfied, he closed it and handed over the $500 he had brought. Sky took the 5 crisp $100 bills and inspected them just as carefully. A moment later, she pocketed the money and extended her hand. Pleasure doing business with you. Hawk shifted the laptop to his left hand and shook hers. Likewise. No small talk. Just business. The transaction complete, Sky got back in her van, started the engine, and drove off without another word. Hawk returned to his apartment, placed the girl's old laptop from Sky on his folding table, and set the girl's old phone from Gwen next to it. Comparing them like this, Gwen was better. Wait, what am I thinking? Hawk frowned again, shaking the distracting thoughts from his head. He connected the laptop to the mobile hotspot from Gwen's phone. Next step. Quantico. He opened a satellite map and zoomed in on the coordinates of the military base. Some of the more classified buildings were blurred out. But it didn't matter. With a single glance, Hawk found it. A ruined, fenced-off structure on the edge of the base. He spent the next half-hour cross-referencing information, confirming that this was, in fact, the remains of the lab where Bruce Banner was exposed. The internet was a powerful tool. After the Avengers were revealed to the world, and with Banner's own public incident back in '09, his history was all out there. His life story, how he became the Hulk, when he became the Hulk, it was all online. Even the gossip about his past relationship with Betty Ross had been dredged up. But that wasn't what Hawk was focused on. Sitting in his new apartment, one hand propping up his chin, the other scrolling on the trackpad, Hawk stared at the satellite image of the abandoned lab, a thoughtful, calculating look in his eyes. Hawk had a feeling he was about to cross that line. He had no choice. He had no money, and even if he did, the military wasn't about to sell him a piece of a top-secret gamma experiment. But he needed that gammonium. His Saint armor depended on it. However, stealing the gammonium from a US military base was not the same as stealing vibranium from Wakanda. To put it simply, if he stole the vibranium and got caught, the world wouldn't come after him. It would be like starting a raid and having the rest of the server automatically join his team. The world would come after Wakanda. The 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council would undoubtedly demand that Wakanda share its resources, or at the very least, allow a UN peacekeeping force within its borders. So, he wasn't worried about Wakanda. Hawk stared at the satellite map on his screen, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 24 comments 0 vote. 26 The job isn't even half over, and I'm already fired. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the incredible support we had last week. Words can't express how grateful I am. And as a way of saying thanks, I've prepared this event. Along with the 100 PS bonuses, here are the new milestone rewards. 500 PS, 2 bonus chapters. 1000 PS, 3 bonus chapters. 1500 PS, 4 bonus chapters. 2000 PS, 5 bonus chapters. Top 5 ranking, 5 extra chapters. That means if we hit 2000 power stones this week, you'll be getting a total of 30 chapters. And if we break into the top 5, it'll go up to 35 chapters. I've poured a crazy amount of time into this event, especially since I doubled my editing efforts starting from chapter 37. Best regards. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The next day. On the subway ride to Oscorp, Hawk was still thinking about the gamma stones stored at the Quantico military base. He had a plan. If he was going to hit a place like Quantico, there was only one way to do it. A lightning raid. Get in, get out. No hesitation. After all, he was talking about storming a United States military base, not some random warehouse. The FBI Academy was there. The infamous CIA headquarters in Langley was just down the road. Robbing Quantico was the equivalent of taking a dump on the heads of the US military, the FBI, and the CIA, all at the same time. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I need to make a trip out to Quantico first. Do some recon. At the very least, I need to scout the place out and map an escape route. Lost in thought, Hawk swiped his keycard and walked into the Oscorp building, heading up to the bioelectricity department. And then, he was immediately called into his supervisor's office. The future Electro, Max Dillon, was already there. The supervisor looked uncomfortable. After a long silence, he finally spoke to Max. Starting today, you're being transferred to the maintenance division. Max Dillon looked stunned. Sir, I'm not finished. The supervisor cut him off, then turned to Hawk and sighed. Hawk, you're being let go. You can collect your final week's pay. Quote. Hawk just blinked. He wasn't as shocked as Max. He had already figured out what this was about. He looked at the supervisor, his expression calm. May I ask why? The accident in Dr. Connors' lab yesterday. Knew it. Hawk thought to himself. Max was frantic. Sir, what does a power outage have to do with us? Our department only supplies the building's general power. The specialized equipment in the labs runs on a completely different. The supervisor rubbed his forehead. That's enough. This isn't a negotiation, it's a decision. You can go. Hawk, stay. Max stood frozen for a moment, then looked at Hawk. Hawk just shrugged. It's okay, Max. All right. Max looked like he wanted to say more, but he just hung his head and walked out of the office. Once Max was gone, the supervisor sighed again. I'm sorry, kid. I pulled every string I had to keep Max, but there was nothing I could do for you. You're a good worker, Hawk. If there's anything you need, just ask. I'll do what I can. Hawk smiled slightly. It's fine. Just make sure you explain the situation to Mrs. Snow. His only reason for coming to Oscorp was to find the gamanium. Now that he had, there was no reason to stay. His original plan had been to ask for a few days off, not get fired. After all, this job was a favor from Mrs. Snow. She was a good person who had always looked out for him, and he didn't want to make her look bad. But now he didn't even have to ask for time off. The supervisor looked relieved. Of course. In fact, I just got off the phone with Selena. I know this wasn't your fault, or, what is his names? Hawk prompted him. Max. Right, Max. The supervisor's brow smoothed out. I know it wasn't your fault. But, my hands are tied. Hawk just shook his head with a small, knowing smile. The truth was, Max had been right. The bioelectricity department's power grid was for the building's basic needs. Those eels could only generate limited juice. It wasn't nearly enough to power the dozens of labs with their massive, energy-guzzling equipment. But you can't fix stupid. The whole mess had started because some idiot executive at Oscorp thought the bioelectricity department could handle a bigger load. And now that there had been an accident, that same executive was refusing to take responsibility. Yep. Scumbag move, but it fit the corporate profile. It was that simple. Hawk didn't linger. He took the $800 for his final week's work, walked out of the office, and left the Oscorp building without a backward glance. Hawk, wait. Just as he was about to cross the street to the subway, Gwen came running out of the building. Hawk turned and watched her catch up. Did Mrs. Snow call you? Yeah. Gwen stopped, leaning over with her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. She'd run down as soon as she'd gotten the call, but by the time she got to the bioelectricity department, they told her Hawk had already left. Good thing she'd caught him. After a moment, she straightened up and looked at his face. Are you okay? Hawk shrugged. Never better. He hadn't let Mrs. Snow's favor go to waste, he was free to head to Quantico, and he'd gotten a free week's pay out of it. What was not to like? He saw the genuine concern in Gwen's eyes and gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry, I'm really fine. The supervisor said I could even come back and work here during winter break. The supervisor did indeed say so. He had no intention of coming back, but he hadn't turned down the offer either. You never know. Never burn a bridge. Never say never. A lesson well learned. Gwen seemed to relax, seeing that he was genuinely not upset. So, what are your plans now? You've still got over a month until school starts. Probably just stay home and read. You know how it is. It's too late to find another decent summer job now. Hawk shrugged, then started to turn away. Anyway, you should get back inside. I'm really okay. Gwen nodded. All right. Well, if you get bored, we could go study at the library sometime. Hawk paused for a second. But Gwen didn't give him a chance to reply. It seemed that ever since she'd given him the phone, she'd figured out the best way to talk to him was to not let him talk at all. She just smiled, turned, and with her hands in her pockets, walked back into the Oscorp building. Hawk watched her go, a small, genuine smile on her face as she waved at him one last time. He frowned slightly. The next second, he turned and walked away. Time to get to work. Quantico. Here I come. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. 27 On his way to a heist, Hawk gets robbed bonus. Thank you for 1200 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the incredible support we had last week. Words can't express how grateful I am. And as a way of saying thanks, I've prepared this event. Along with the 100 PS bonuses, here are the new milestone rewards. 500 PS, 2 bonus chapters. 1000 PS, 3 bonus chapters. 1500 PS, 4 bonus chapters. 2000 PS, 5 bonus chapters. Top 5 ranking, 5 extra chapters. That means if we hit 2000 power stones this week, you'll be getting a total of 30 chapters. And if we break into the top 5, it'll go up to 35 chapters. I've poured a crazy amount of time into this event, especially since I doubled my editing efforts starting from chapter 37. Best regards. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Vroom. 2:30 p.m. The flight from New York touched down, taxiing smoothly to a stop at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport in Washington, D.C. Half an hour later. Traveling light, Hawk walked out of the airport, went straight to the taxi stand, and got into the back of the first cab in line. He gave the address of a motel in Quantico town to the young driver. The driver nodded, started the meter, and pulled away from the curb. Just because the FBI Academy was in Quantico didn't mean the area was off limits to civilians. You just couldn't waltz onto the military-controlled parts. Quantico town itself, the area surrounding the base, was open to the public. Any disciplined man is a person of action, and Hawk was a man who had thrown 10,000 punches a day for 1,000 straight days. His ability to act was second to none. The moment he'd left the Oscorp building that morning, he had gone straight to the airport and bought a ticket for the next flight to DC. He hadn't even gone home to pack a change of clothes. Fortunately, he had spent all of last night studying the satellite maps of Quantico, roughing out a plan for how he was going to get his gamanium. Otherwise, he'd be stumbling around completely lost. Plan A. Get in quiet, get out quiet. But if I'm spotted, switch to Plan B immediately. Overwhelming force. No survivors. Sitting in the back of the taxi, Hawk silently reviewed his plan, then turned his gaze to the scenery passing by outside the window. And then, without changing his expression, his eyes flickered to the young driver in the front seat. He casually pulled his phone from his pocket, the one he'd forgotten to turn back on after the flight. The phone booted up. A series of dings announced a flood of incoming text messages. Hawk's eyebrow twitched. Just as he was about to unlock the screen to see what spam his carrier had sent him this time, a low voice, accompanied by the black, unblinking eye of a gun barrel, filled the car. Don't move. Give me the phone. Quote. Hawk froze. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? No, seriously. I'm on my way to rob a military base, and I'm getting robbed the second I land. Damn it. This is the nation's capital. Is the crime rate really worse than New York's? In an instant, Hawk's opinion of Washington, D.C. plummeted. The young driver, watching him in the rearview mirror, saw that he was frozen. He growled, waggling the gun. I said, don't move. Hand over the phone. Hawk snapped out of it. Do you want me to not move, or do you want me to give you the phone? Quote. The driver fell silent for a moment, processing the question. The next second, he seemed to snap. Motherfucker, don't get smart with me, give me the F. Ring. Just as the driver was losing his cool, Hawk's phone began to ring. It was Gwen. Hawk answered the call and put the phone to his ear. Hello. Quote. The young driver broke. He watched in the rearview mirror as this kid, completely ignoring the gun pointed at his head, not even bothering to pretend to be scared, just casually answered his phone. He had a full-blown meltdown. The next second, he slammed on the brakes. The taxi screeched to a halt. He twisted in his seat, lunging for the back. Motherfucker, all F. Thump. Arg. Quote. On the other end of the line, Gwen, who had just been about to speak, heard what sounded like a pained scream. Was that someone screaming, Hawk? Quote. Yeah. Some guy walking by was watching a movie on his phone. Probably some violent action flick. Sounds like it. That scream sounded exactly like someone getting their ribs broken. Hawk, who was now leaning over the front seat, one hand clamped over the driver's mouth, looked down at the exact spot on the man's ribs he had just struck. You can tell where someone's injured just from the sound of their scream. A laugh came from the other end of the line. Of course. My dad's a police captain. And between you and me, I'm probably more qualified than most of the rookies at his precinct. Quote. I can see that. Hawk was speechless. What could he even say? A genius is a genius. They learn everything faster and better than anyone else. Just then, Gwen's laugh became bright and clear. I'm kidding. Of course I can't. Quote. Right. You had me for a second. So, why was your phone off? I've been trying to call you. What's up? Hawk maintained his position, one hand silencing the driver, the other holding the phone to his ear. Come downstairs. What? Dr. Connors found out you were fired and that you were the scapegoat. He felt bad, so he prepared a little something for you. But I couldn't reach you, so I just came over. Are you not home? Gwen, who had just parked her yellow Corolla in front of Hawk's new apartment building, tapped an envelope sitting on the passenger seat and peered up at his window. Hearing that Gwen was right outside his apartment, Hawk went silent for a second, then it clicked. Right, I'm not home. Can you just hold on to it for me? You can give it to me when school starts. I'm already out of the car. Gwen closed her car door and started walking toward the building. You're on the top floor, facing the street, right? Your window's open. I'll just take the fire escape and leave it inside for you. Hawk was stunned. He wasn't surprised that Gwen knew where he lived. She had probably seen his address on his employment forms. But, how do you know that? I saw your shorts hanging in the window. You've had those for 3 years. And if I remember correctly, they used to be pants, right? You cut them into shorts back in 10th grade. Anyway, I'm just going to drop this off. I've gotta get going. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 9 comments 0 vote. 28 a photograph of Hawken. Bonus. Thank you for 100 Power Stones. Here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk listened to the dial tone for a moment, then pocketed his phone. The next second, his mind was racing. He wasn't worried about Gwen being in his apartment. He was worried about what she might find. He quickly ran a mental checklist of anything embarrassing or incriminating. Embarrassing. Nope. He didn't own any posters, let alone magazines or videos. He was too broke. In his younger years, when he had too much energy, he would just go up to the roof and punch the air until he was too exhausted to think, then go back inside and sleep. Incriminating. He didn't think so. The 5 Chitauri weapons were wrapped tightly in a bedsheet and shoved all the way under his bed. She probably wouldn't find them. So, whatever. Let her. Time to deal with the problem at hand. With that thought, Hawk's focus returned to the present. The warmth in his eyes from his conversation with Gwen vanished, replaced by a chillingly cold indifference. The young driver, his mouth still covered, stared at Hawk with wide, terrified eyes. Hawk savored the fear in the man's gaze. A slow, handsome smile spread across his face. Now, it's my turn to rob you. Quote. After hanging up, Gwen put her phone away and walked over to the fire escape on the side of Hawk's building. She climbed effortlessly to the top floor. She pushed aside the pair of shorts that had been hanging in the half-open window, shorts that, on closer inspection, looked like they had once been a pair of sweatpants, and slipped inside. She looked around. The living room was small. A second-hand sofa and a folding table with a laptop on it took up 2/3 of the space. But it was clean. Not spotless, but neat and orderly. Gwen's first impression of the place was that it was comfortable. She had never been to Hawk's old apartment, and this was the first time she'd seen his new one. But as she pulled Dr. Connor's envelope from her pocket and set it on the folding table, her gaze was drawn to the closed laptop. It wasn't that she was surprised he owned a computer. It was the stickers on the lid. Are these unicorns? Gwen couldn't help but laugh, looking at the cutesy, girly stickers plastered all over the laptop. She wondered which of his female friends had sold him the computer. It never even crossed her mind that Hawk might have put the stickers on himself, or that a girl might have given him the laptop as a gift. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. No one knew Hawk better than she did. She had no doubt that if she had tried to talk to him after giving him the phone, he would have just handed it right back to her. That was why she had deliberately avoided him for the past few weeks. With that thought, Gwen's eyes returned to the envelope on the table. She turned to leave. But as she turned, the sleeve of her open jacket caught the air, creating a small gust of wind that lifted the envelope from the table. It fluttered through the air and drifted into the adjacent bedroom. Gwen sighed and walked into the room. She bent down to pick up the envelope, which had landed just short of the bed. As she stood up, a faint, greenish light pulsing from under the bed caught her eye. She froze. Her eyes darted to the space under the bed. She could just make out the shape of a large, tightly wrapped bundle. The bedsheet it was wrapped in was clearly cheap. It wasn't opaque. A faint, greenish light was pulsing from within, like a slow, rhythmic breath. The light was dim. Even in the daylight, she wouldn't have noticed it if she hadn't caught it out of the corner of her eye. What is that? Gwen crouched down, peering under the bed, her brow furrowed in curiosity. Just as she was about to stand back up, her gaze shifted. She saw a cracked picture frame on the nightstand. Inside the frame was a photograph. The background was Times Square. The subjects were a boy and a girl, both looking to be about 14 years old, their clothes slightly faded and worn. The boy, Gwen recognized. It was Hawk. He was smiling. A wide, genuinely happy smile. Gwen couldn't remember ever seeing him smile like that. But the girl. Gwen's frown deepened. She put the envelope down and picked up the photograph. The picture must have been taken when Hawk was 14, not long after he started at Midtown. Gwen was sure of the date. She recognized the pants Hawk was wearing in the photo. They were the same ones she had just been mentally teasing him about, the ones he had worn for 3 years, and when they got too short, had cut into shorts instead of throwing them away. The very same shorts that were still hanging in his window. But who was the girl? Gwen studied the photo, her eyes drawn to the girl with the pale complexion, who was also smiling happily, her arms linked tightly with Hawk's. His sister. He's never mentioned a sister. Gwen saw the subtle family resemblance in their features. She racked her brain. Hawk had never, ever mentioned her. Is she gone? Gwen thought of the most likely reason for his silence. She gently placed the picture frame back on the nightstand, stood up, and walked out of the room. As she reached the living room, she stopped, slapping her forehead. She had forgotten the envelope. Huh, where'd it go? Gwen walked back into the bedroom, confused. The envelope was no longer on the floor where she'd left it. Then, she realized what must have happened. She crouched down again. Sure enough, the envelope had slid under the bed, probably blown there by the breeze when she rose. Gwen sighed, reached under the bed, and felt around for it. Soon, her fingertips brushed against the edge of the envelope. And at the same time, they brushed against the tightly wrapped bedsheet. The moment her fingers made contact, she felt it. A cold, hard sensation, like touching metal, shot from her fingertips to her brain. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 13 comments, 0 vote. 29 Hawk opens the floodgates bonus. Thank you for 200 power stones. Here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. A remote backroad, 30 miles north of Quantico town. Hawk had studied the satellite maps. He knew the general layout of the area and the route he was supposed to take from the airport. So, the moment the young driver had veered off the main road, Hawk knew something was wrong. His memory was already sharp, but after awakening his Cosmo, it had become flawless. Hawk got out of the car and scanned his surroundings. Remote. Muddy. A perfect place to rob, murder, and bury a body. No wonder the kid had driven him out here. Behind him, still in the car, the young driver was bruised and bloodied, but alive. He was still screaming. Hawk hadn't killed him. Not yet. After a moment, Hawk turned, opened the car door, and with a single, effortless motion, dragged the whimpering driver out of the car. He tossed him onto the muddy dirt road. Splat. The driver, dizzy and disoriented, scrambled to his feet, driven by pure survival instinct. He fell to his knees in front of Hawk, his voice trembling. Please, don't kill me. Please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Hawk looked down at him, the man who had been so arrogant just minutes ago, now so pathetic. His voice was cold. You're not sorry you were wrong. You're just sorry you're about to die. Quote. The driver's body went rigid, his pleas becoming even more desperate. Hawk's eyes narrowed. Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you. The driver's mind raced. He looked up at Hawk, his face a swollen mess, and babbled, You can have the car. My money. I have money. You can have all my money. Not good enough. If I kill you, the car and the money are mine anyway. Hawk shook his head, his expression unchanged. Try again. Quote. You can't kill me. If you do, you'll be a wanted man. If you let me go, I swear, I won't tell anyone. I won't say a word. Please, don't kill me. The driver's words tumbled out, his eyes wide with a desperate will to live. Hawk glanced at him, then looked down, as if considering it. He seemed to be weighing the odds of the man keeping his word. Quote. The driver, seeing Hawk's gaze shift, felt a flicker of hope. He kept begging, his voice cracking, while his right hand slowly, carefully, crept toward the small of his back. The next second, Hiya! He whipped a folding knife from his waistband and, with a guttural cry, lunged at Hawk, his face twisted in a snarl. Die! Hawk looked up. His eyes were like ice. He didn't even flinch. He just slapped him. Whump. The driver's head began to spin, as if it were a top that had just been wound. Faster and faster. Tighter and tighter. Until, squelch. His neck, twisted into an impossible shape, tore loose from his shoulders. Splat. Thump. Hawk looked down at the head that had just rolled to a stop at his feet, the snarl still frozen on its face. A contemptuous smile touched his lips. I was actually going to let you go. A pity. I gave you the one and only chance I might ever have for weakness in this life, and you thought it was fear. Hawk's gaze shifted to the headless body, which was now gushing blood onto the muddy ground. He hadn't been lying. He had actually considered letting the man live. It wasn't just because he had business to attend to and didn't want any complications. There was another, more important reason. The line. Just as he had thought, once that line was crossed, he had no idea what he would become. Killing is like a valve. Once it's opened, the sanctity of life is gone. This was especially true for a transmigrator, someone who already had a flexible moral compass. The Chitauri had been different. Hawk had seen them without their helmets. They were insects. A human doesn't feel guilt for killing a bug. And Hawk wasn't about to apply his moral code to a race of overgrown cockroaches. But this man was different. And yet, just as Hawk had suspected. Even though this was the first time he had truly killed a human, as he looked at the headless corpse, he felt nothing. No revulsion, no guilt. Not even a flicker of emotion. No, wait. He did feel something. This feels no different from killing a Chitauri. Hawk closed his eyes for a moment. He had no intention of trying to close the valve again. Some things, once done, can't be undone. The floodgates were open. Whether he liked it or not, from this day forward, killing would no longer be something he shied away from. With that final thought, Hawk turned away from the head in the mud and the bleeding corpse. He got into the taxi, glanced up at the clear blue sky, then started the engine and drove away. He didn't bother to bury the body. The valve was open, and it wasn't closing. Whether the body was found or not was no longer his problem. Killing one is still killing. Killing another, or another 100, was just a matter of numbers now. However, I can kill. But I must not revel in it. A true warrior always maintains a humble heart. Hawk thought to himself, steering the taxi back onto the main road. He glanced around, got his bearings, and headed toward Quantico town. He might not have a driver's license in this life, but that didn't mean he didn't know how to drive. As the taxi disappeared down the road, the backroad returned to its usual quiet, desolate state. About half an hour later, a footstep broke the silence. Then a second, and a third. Soon, 3 men in dark sunglasses walked onto the scene. Their eyes fell on the head in the mud and the headless corpse. Its bleeding finally stopped. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 21 comments, 0 vote. 30 Gwen's unintentional GPS tracker. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk didn't drive the stolen taxi all the way into Quantico town. About 10 miles out, he veered off the road, sent the taxi plunging into a reservoir, and started walking. But his luck was holding. After about a mile, a car pulled over. The driver was a military wife who lived in the town, on her way back from a supply run. When she heard where he was headed, she cheerfully offered him a ride. Hawk didn't refuse. Once they got to town, there was no awkward drama. She didn't find it strange that he was alone or invite him to stay at her place. She just dropped him off in front of a clothing store, and from there, it was a short walk to the town's motel. Hawk paid for the room, got his key, and went up to the second floor. Before he went inside, he paused and looked out over the town. He could see it from here, not too far in the distance, the main gate of the Quantico military base. The entrance was heavily guarded by soldiers. Every vehicle, every pedestrian, had to stop and be searched. Hawk only looked for a moment before turning away. It was too late today. Tomorrow. Recon during the day. Strike at night. And then, get the hell out. By the time the driver's body was discovered and the investigation eventually led back to him, it would be weeks, if not months. In some countries, a murder might be a big deal, a case to be solved overnight. But here, there were a lot of nobodies. Hawk figured that by the time the authorities even had a name, he'd already be wearing his saint armor. And at that point, I am inevitable. Besides, Hawk didn't think they'd ever track him down. Here's a joke. The security camera at the airport taxi stand was broken. Hawk had seen it when he got in the cab. The one and only camera that might have recorded him had been decapitated. That was another reason he hadn't bothered to hide the body. He didn't care, and he had a very realistic understanding of federal law enforcement's efficiency. The different agencies didn't talk to each other. To put it simply, if you committed a crime in New York and left fingerprints, and then committed another crime in California and left fingerprints, the authorities in California would have no way of matching them. The state databases weren't connected. And more importantly, Hawk had been a model citizen in this life. He had no criminal record. His fingerprints weren't in any database, not even New York's. So even if they found the body and his prints all over it, they'd have no one to match them to. Half an hour later. After completing his 10,000 punch routine in the motel room, Hawk took a shower. When he got out, he saw his phone, which he'd left on the bed, ringing. He had just picked it up, before he could even see who was calling, when the screen went black and the ringing stopped. Dead battery. Hawk shrugged. He didn't give it another thought. He didn't bother looking for a charger. Just like before, he had no one to talk to. And no one who wanted to talk to him. He tossed the dead phone aside, pulled back the covers, and got into bed. Time to sleep. Big day tomorrow. Within 3 minutes, he was fast asleep, a soft snore filling the quiet room. New York City. In her bedroom, Gwen frowned as her call to Hawk went straight to a, "This number is no longer in service," message. She put her phone down, tapped it against her chin, and then turned to her laptop. She opened a website, glanced at a two-factor authentication code on her phone, and typed it in. A moment later, a map appeared on her screen. There was a single, pulsing dot on it. But the dot wasn't in New York City. It was Washington, D.C. Why is Hawk's phone in D.C.? Did it get stolen? Gwen thought to herself. She swore she hadn't meant to track him. When she'd gotten home, she had received an automated text from her phone provider, a security alert stating that a device linked to her account had logged in from an unusual location. That's when she remembered. When she'd given Hawk her old phone, she had wiped all the data, but apparently never logged out of her account. Now, seeing that the phone's last known location before it died was in Washington, D.C., her first thought was that it had been stolen. After all, New York City had a lot of thieves. Gwen thought back to the first phone she'd ever bought, the one that had been stolen less than 3 days after she got it. A wave of resentment washed over her. Whatever. I'll just give him another one when school starts. She shook her head, closed the tracking website, and then pulled up a different page, a digital copy of a newspaper. It was an article published right after the Battle of New York. It had a picture of a block in Jackson Heights, Queens, that had been completely leveled. Gwen scrolled through the article, reading the details. Just then, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She looked up. The next second, her eyes lit up. An idea struck her. She closed the webpage, jumped up from her chair, and ran to her bedroom door, pulling it open. Dad. Quote. George Stacy, who made it a point to check on his daughter every night when he got home, was startled by the sudden appearance of Gwen, her eyes shining with excitement. A slow smile spread across his face. Sorry, kiddo. No new intel on Spider-Man for you tonight. Recently, a masked vigilante in a ridiculous red and blue suit had been swinging around the city, playing hero. The NYPD was not amused. Their official stance, if vigilantes were so effective, what was the point of having police? But everyone else was fascinated. The media loved it. They had a new headline. The internet was buzzing, with forums and message boards dedicated to figuring out who the man behind the mask was. Gwen was curious too. Especially since her father was a police captain. Gwen shook her head. I'm not interested in Spider-Man, Dad. George chuckled. Then yesterday that was Mary Jane. She was the one who was curious, not me. Gwen cut him off, then got to the point. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Dad, can I ask you for a favor? Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. 31 The Quantico Solo Run bonus. Thank you for 300 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The next morning, Hawk got dressed, went down to the motel's front desk, and pulled $30 from his pocket. One more night, please. Room key. Here. Hawk handed over the key. The clerk glanced at the room number, updated the booking, and handed the key back. Hawk took it, said a quick, thanks, and walked out of the motel. A short while later, he was there. Not at the Quantico base itself, but on a mountain trail right next to it. Hawk wasn't worried about his morning run attracting any unwanted attention. He wasn't the only one out. Several other residents from Quantico town were also jogging along the same path. Hawk kept a steady pace behind a group of runners, blending in perfectly. Soon, the trail came to a sharp bend. Hawk saw the group ahead of him disappear around the corner. He glanced back, the next group of runners was still a ways behind. Without a moment's hesitation, he accelerated. With a nearly silent whoosh, he shot off the trail and into the woods. By the time the next group of joggers rounded the bend, Hawk was gone. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the forest. It was late afternoon when Hawk finally returned to the motel. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He smoothed it out. On it was a simple, hand-drawn map of the inside of the Quantico military base. Barracks, admin buildings, motor pool, airstrip, and the abandoned lab. Hawk had spent the entire morning getting the lay of the land. He'd spent the afternoon scouting the surrounding forest, mapping out 3 separate exfiltration routes. He hadn't decided which route he would take yet. But it didn't matter. Having options was enough. He would adapt on the fly once the job was done. Hawk studied the map one last time, his eyes tracing the symbols only he could understand. Then, he methodically tore the paper into tiny, irretrievable pieces and threw them in the trash. Soon, the sun began to set. Hawk went back down to the front desk, returned his key, and checked out of the motel. It was a motel, after all. The clerk had seen people check in with a date and check out 10 minutes later. An early checkout didn't even raise an eyebrow. After leaving, Hawk found a nearby pizza place, ordered a pie, and sat by the window to eat. Never go into battle on an empty stomach. It would be a pathetic way to go, getting caught because he ran out of energy halfway through a fight or was too weak to escape. Night fell completely. Fed and ready, Hawk moved under the cover of darkness. He became a phantom in the woods, his speed so great that he was on the verge of creating sonic booms with every step. Soon, he arrived at the base's perimeter fence, a chain-link barrier topped with high-voltage wire. He didn't rush in. He looked up, his eyes scanning the tall guard towers. On top of each tower, a powerful searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping slowly across a predetermined path. As the beam swung toward him, Hawk pressed himself into the shadow of a large tree, his black hoodie blending into the night. The baseball cap was out. He'd already worn it this morning, too risky. But the black hoodie was perfect. He'd found it in the trunk of the taxi before he'd sent it to its watery grave. Soon, the searchlight passed. The next second, Hawk moved. He exploded from behind the tree, his right knee bending as the ground beneath his foot compressed. He launched himself upwards like a silent projectile, soaring effortlessly over the fence that was meant to be impassable, and landed softly inside the base. Now that he was in, the hard part was over. All that was left was to find the lab, get the goods, and get out. 1 minute later, he saw it. The abandoned lab, surrounded by a temporary corrugated metal wall. The only entrance was guarded by 2 soldiers. Hawk stopped about a half-mile out, using a stray shipping container for cover. He watched the 2 guards. Time to go. Hawk closed his eyes, exhaled a slow, steady breath, and then opened them, his gaze locked on his target. The next second. Boom. The grass beneath his feet ripped apart as a sonic boom thundered through the night. Hawk shot forward like a cannonball. The 2 soldiers on guard duty were laughing and talking, expecting another uneventful night. Until they caught a blur of motion out of the corner of their eyes. A split second later, the sound of the sonic boom hit them like a physical blow. Thump, thump. The 2 soldiers didn't even have time to cry out. Their eyes rolled back in their heads, and they collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Hawk still hadn't used lethal force. He had knocked them out in an instant and was already inside the metal perimeter. The next second. Shit. Who's there? Quote. After slipping through a gap in the fence, Hawk saw them. Standing in front of the dilapidated lab building, its outer walls still scarred from the original explosion, were 2 more soldiers. His brow furrowed. Seriously. Was this necessary? They already had guards at the outer gate, why put 2 more inside? He had only been able to see the outside of the perimeter during his recon. The two soldiers, after a moment of shock at his sudden appearance, reacted. The next second, they raised their rifles. Contact. Sound the alarm. WEEWOO. 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 In an instant, a piercing alarm shattered the night's silence, blaring across the entire Quantico base. The moment the soldiers pulled their triggers, Hawk's figure vanished. He reappeared a split second later, directly in front of them. The soldiers outside hadn't pulled their triggers. They got to live. Quote. These two. Hawk's expression was a mask of cold fury. His right fist lashed out at the two stunned soldiers before him. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 32 The speedrun bonus. Thank you for 400 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Beep. 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 The moment the piercing alarm blared across the Quantico military base, every soldier, whether on duty, in the barracks, or on leave in town, froze, their faces a mask of pure shock. The next second, reality kicked in. Holy shit. Battle stations. We're under attack. Jesus Christ, what's happening? Did the Japanese attack again? Wait, this is Quantico, not Pearl Harbor. For a moment, there was chaos. But these were Marines. They snapped into combat readiness in an instant. This was Quantico, after all, home of the United States Marine Corps. The FBI Academy and CIA headquarters were right down the road. Less than 3 seconds after the alarm sounded, the first soldier was on the scene. Then a second, a third. Go, go, go. What's the target? The old Gamma Lab. Fuck. A lieutenant colonel, hearing the location of the attack, swore viciously. He threw on his fatigues, grabbed his phone, and started running. The call connected instantly. Yes. A deep, gravelly voice answered. General, the Gamma Lab has been breached. Quote. On the other end of the line, General Thaddeus Ross, who had just left the Pentagon and gotten into his car, went rigid. What did he just hear? The Gamma Lab has been breached. How? The lab is on the Marine base at Quantico. Who the hell could get in there? Still reeling from the news, General Ross's voice was sharp. Say that again. What's been breached? The Gamma Lab, sir. Shit. Ross's heart sank. What's the situation? The quick reaction force is on site. I'm on my way now. Quote. General Ross took a deep breath, loosened his tie, and slapped the back of the driver's seat. Quantico. Now. The driver nodded and slammed his foot on the gas, peeling out right in front of 2 stunned Capitol Police officers. The 2 cops just stared at each other, speechless. Meanwhile, back at the base, the quick reaction force had arrived at the fenced-off perimeter of the Gamma Lab. From inside, they could hear a series of thunderous crashes. A moment later, a group of panicked, terrified scientists burst out of the entrance. The soldiers immediately swarmed them, grabbing them and pulling them to safety. What's going on in there? How many intruders? What did they want? One. There's only one. He's after the Gamma Stones. Quote. The quick reaction force captain stared at the scientist who had spoken. The other soldiers looked at him in disbelief. Did you just say, one? Yes, just one. The scientist's face was still pale with terror. He's not human. He shattered a concrete wall with a single punch. Bullets don't even touch him. All the guards who shot at him, they're dead. The soldiers exchanged stunned looks. Just then, another soldier, leaning on a scientist for support, his leg clearly broken, spoke up. He's telling the truth. There's only one of them. The captain's attention immediately snapped to him. Soldier, report. It's just like he said. One intruder. He seems to be after the Gamma Stones. Our bullets couldn't hit him. He killed every soldier who opened fire on him, almost instantly. What about you? Weren't you listening? The injured soldier, on the verge of a breakdown, screamed at the captain. He killed every soldier who shot at him. The truth was, he had shot at him too. But, the moment he'd pulled the trigger, his rifle had jammed. And for that reason, and that reason alone, Hawk had spared his life, shattering his leg instead and taking him out of the fight. The other soldiers and armed scientists in the lab had not been so lucky. Just as Hawk had predicted. Once the valve of killing was opened, it was no longer a choice. It was just a matter of numbers. But he was still holding back. By now, Hawk had reached the basement of the Gamma lab. The first thing he saw was the gaping hole that had been dug into the floor. Thump. Hawk, still in his hoodie and mask, leapt down into the pit. At the bottom, a row-hewn tunnel stretched out before him. Pickaxes and shovels lay scattered on the ground. How primitive. No, wait. This was probably intentional. The military is not a monolith. Hawk thought to himself, his eyes scanning the walls of the tunnel. There they were. The walls were made of the same strange, dark stone he had seen in Dr. Connors's lab. Just then, a phoenix cry echoed through his cosmo, and a message was delivered to him. Devour. So I just need to let you absorb it. That simplifies things. Hawk processed the new information. He had thought he would have to play miner and dig out all these stones himself. But, all he had to do was place his hands on the walls, burn his cosmo, and let the phoenix constellation within him absorb the gammonium stored inside. This was perfect. A wide grin spread across Hawk's face. He was about to begin. But just as he raised his hands, his gaze snapped back to the hole he had just jumped through. He threw a punch at the ceiling, a blast of pure force shooting from his fist. Boom. The entrance to the basement collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris raining down into the tunnel. The shockwave washed over him, but he stood firm, unaffected. He just didn't want to be disturbed. There. Now I can work in peace. Without another moment's hesitation, Hawk placed his hands on the tunnel walls. The next second, he unleashed his cosmo. Boom. 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 Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. 33, smash and dash bonus. Thank you for the 500 PS milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. How long does it take for a building to collapse? There's no single answer. But here, on the military base at Quantico, the old Gamma lab, already structurally compromised from Bruce Banner's little accident, finally gave way. A massive explosion from underground was the final straw. In less than 5 seconds, the 3-story building imploded, becoming a heap of rubble and twisted steel. A thick cloud of dust billowed outwards, slamming against the surrounding metal fence with a deafening clatter. The quick reaction force that had been about to storm the building scrambled backward. They stared at the ruins, then collectively swallowed hard. If they had gone in just a few seconds earlier, they would have been buried along with it. After the initial shock and relief, the soldiers all looked to their captain. Coyote 1, what are your orders? How the hell should I know? The captain, after a moment of stunned silence, finally found his voice. Pack it up. We're done here. His men stared at him. Sir, what part of, we're done, did you not understand? The building's gone. What are we supposed to do, dig the intruder's body out of the rubble? The captain rolled his eyes. He had been expecting a firefight. Instead, he got this. A complete and utter anticlimax. Just then, a jeep screeched to a halt nearby. The lieutenant colonel who had called General Ross jumped out. Coyote 2, stand down your men, the captain ordered his second in command. Yes, sir. The captain slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked over to the colonel. The colonel didn't even wait for a salute. He was staring at the still settling dust cloud over the ruins. What happened? The captain shook his head. To be honest, sir, we're not entirely sure. But we can confirm, there was only one intruder. He then repeated what the scientists had told him, and how the building had collapsed just as his team was about to make entry. Hearing that there had only been one intruder, the colonel's face went blank. Are you sure? Just one. Yes, sir. Mother of, the colonel bit back the curse, a look of sheer disbelief on his face. One man. What kind of maniac pulls something like this? It wasn't that Quantico had never been attacked before. But, even foreign agents came in teams. And most of them never even made it past the main gate. Everyone knew that Quantico was a raid boss, a team effort. And this guy tried to solo it. What was he thinking? The colonel couldn't wrap his head around it. The captain just shrugged. He glanced back at the rubble. Maybe it was a suicide mission, sir. Maybe the building was his only target. He never planned on getting out. The colonel considered it for a moment, then nodded. It's the only explanation that makes any sense. Shit. I can't believe I called the general for this. I should have waited. The colonel's face fell as he remembered his frantic call to General Ross. If he had known it was just a suicide bomber, he never would have made the call. Well, at least, not in such a panic. Now he had to call back. The colonel sighed, told his aide to have the base control room stand down the alarm, and pulled out his phone again. The call connected instantly. Report. General, the intruder is dead. Dead. General Ross, who was still urging his driver to go faster, was taken aback. What happened? We don't have an ID on the intruder yet, sir, but he was working alone. The Gamma lab has collapsed. We're currently assessing it as a suicide MI. Boom. Holy shit. Just as the colonel was briefing General Ross, a thunderous explosion erupted from the ruins of the Gamma lab. The next second, he saw it. In the glare of the searchlights now focused on the rubble, a figure shot out from the dust and smoke. The colonel froze. The quick reaction force captain let out a cry of disbelief. But his training kicked in instantly. Contact. Light him up. Light him up. Ratatatatata. The rest of the quick reaction force, who had been about to stand down, snapped back into action. They raised their rifles and unleashed a hail of automatic fire at the figure standing in the wreckage, a dark silhouette against the swirling smoke. At the same time, the base-wide alarm, which had just been silenced, began to shriek once more. The soldiers, who had just been dismissed, looked around in confusion. What the hell? Didn't they just turn it off? Just as they were starting to wonder if someone in the control room had hit the wrong button, the sound of gunfire reached them. Shit. Move, move, move. BRRRRRRT. BRRRRRRT. Hawk's figure flickered in and out of existence on top of the rubble. Deep beneath the ruins, the last of the gammonium had been absorbed into his cosmo. He looked up at the soldiers firing at him, and at the reinforcements now swarming the area. And the low rumble of tanks rolling into position, and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of attack helicopters lifting off the ground. Yep, he had officially kicked the hornet's nest. But my work here is done. Now I just need to find a quiet place to digest this meal. Hawk thought to himself. As the smoke around him began to clear, he raised an eyebrow, then turned, bent his knees, and with a final, explosive crack of shattering concrete, launched himself into the sky. The next second, with the searchlights struggling to track him, he carved a perfect arc through the night sky and disappeared into the forest outside the base. Right. Phase 1, the lightning raid, was complete. Time for Phase 2. Run like hell. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. 34 on General Ross's radar bonus. Thank you for the 500 ps milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. By the time General Thaddeus Ross arrived at the Quantico military base, the alarms had been silenced. But the crisis was far from over. The base's command center was a hive of activity, buzzing with controlled panic. This was a major embarrassment. Someone had not only breached their base with ridiculous ease and destroyed a building, but had also managed to get away completely clean. And the worst part, they had lost him. What do you mean, you lost him? We lost visual in the forest, 20 miles south of the base. What about our air support? Sir, it's a dense forest, at night. The choppers couldn't get low enough for a clear shot. Shit. The lieutenant colonel slammed his fist on the table. Scramble everyone. Get those birds back in the air. I want this son of a bitch found. His aide snapped a quick, yes, sir, and hurried out of the room. The colonel stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the live feeds from the helicopters and ground teams on the main screen. Just then, a deep voice came from behind him. He flinched, then spun around to see General Ross, his face dark with fury. General. One intruder, Colonel, and you lost him. Impressive. Ross said, his voice dangerously calm. The Colonel opened his mouth, then closed it. Instead, he had a tech pull up the surveillance footage of the intruder's escape. Ross turned his attention to the main screen. He saw the figure, a silhouette in the smoke and searchlights, then a blur of motion as the intruder launched himself into the air and disappeared into the forest. Ross was stunned. A moment later, he looked at the Colonel. You said the Gamma Lab was the only target. The Colonel nodded quickly. Yes, General. He breached the perimeter, and moments later, the building collapsed. We thought he was a suicide bomber. But then, right as I was updating you, he just burst out of the rubble. Quote. Ross said nothing. He just watched the footage of Hawk's impossible leap on a loop, his mind racing. One man. A clear objective. Inhuman evasion. Superhuman strength. Ross's eyes glinted. Did any other cameras get a look at him? The tech team is reviewing all footage now. Have you got a location on him? No, sir. The Colonel glanced at his aide, who had just returned and was shaking his head. He braced himself. We lost him in the woods, 20 miles south. We're still searching. Ross just nodded. The next second, without another word, he turned and started walking out. Get a crew. I want that lab dug out. Now. The Colonel snapped to attention. Yes, General. By the time the heavy machinery had been brought in, the rubble cleared, and the bodies of the fallen soldiers recovered, the sun was rising. The helicopters, which had been flying all night, returned to base. The pilots were exhausted, but the machines weren't. With fresh crews and a full tank of fuel, the choppers took off again, fanning out in all directions, a dragnet searching for the man who had basically taken a dump on the United States Marine Corps and walked away. The ground troops were just as relentless. The soldiers who had been out all night were replaced by a fresh wave, who were now sweeping through the forests surrounding the base. They were in it for the long haul. Ross hadn't slept either. He was sitting in his car, parked near the ruins of the Gamma Lab, his eyes closed. Just then, his aide, sitting in the driver's seat, answered a call. After a few grunts of acknowledgement, he turned to Ross. General, it's Director Fury. HMPH. Ross slowly opened his eyes, took the phone from his aide, and put it to his ear. General Ross speaking. General Ross. I hear things got a little lively at Quantico last night. The smug, self-satisfied tone on the other end of the line made Ross's head throb. What do you want, Nick? In his office at the Triskelion, Nick Fury, clad in his signature black trench coat and eye patch, leaned back in his chair. He was also watching the footage of Hawk's escape. He chuckled. A joint operation. What do you say? You can kiss my ass. Ross scoffed. This is a military matter. I'm warning you, Nick, stay out of it. And if I remember correctly, your operational authority has been suspended, hasn't it? With that, Ross hung up. He didn't bother to wait for a reply. It would have just been more bullshit anyway. He handed the phone back to his aide, sat up straight, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Any sign of him? The aide shook his head. No, sir. Hey. Ross didn't seem surprised. He let out a dry, humorless laugh and changed the subject. Have they dug out the lab yet? ETA 10 minutes, sir. Let's go. Ross pushed open his car door. I want to see for myself. His aide scrambled to follow. By now, the bodies of the soldiers who had died in the lab had all been recovered. They were laid out in a neat row nearby. Their deaths were all different, but the expressions on their faces were the same: shock, terror, and utter disbelief. Ross's gaze swept over them. He turned to his aide. File a report. Maximum death benefits for all of them. I'll sign off on it personally. The aide nodded and made a note. Soon, the 10 minutes were up. The entrance to the underground tunnel had been cleared. A team of base scientists, who had been on standby, descended into the pit. It's gone. It's all gone. Unbelievable. Did he absorb all of it? Jesus Christ. But why didn't he turn into a monster like the Hulk or the Abomination? A series of shocked, disbelieving cries echoed up from the tunnel. Ross's eyes lit up with a terrifying intensity. Aide. Sir. Find him. At any cost. Understood. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 18 comments, 0 vote. 35 The Phoenix ignited. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. General Ross kept his expression stone cold, but inside his mind was racing. The reports from his scientists had just confirmed his deepest suspicions. An image coalesced in his mind. Captain America. Steve Rogers. To this day, the only successful recipient of the super soldier serum. The peak of human potential. The military had never given up on recreating the serum. But ever since Dr. Abraham Erskine was assassinated, the true formula had been lost to history. One thing, however, was certain. The real super soldier serum required gamma radiation. That was the root cause of the Hulk's creation. Bruce Banner had been a military scientist, working on that very project, when the accident happened. And that accident had given General Ross hope. Even if the Hulk was uncontrollable. But now, a human, with no discernible non-human characteristics. Inhuman reaction time. Superhuman strength and agility. And the complete absorption of all gamma radiation. Ross was now certain. The intruder had come for one thing, the gamma. And when he put the pieces together, the conclusion was inescapable. This was the super soldier he had been searching for. Find him. At any cost. Ross's right hand clenched into a fist. He stared at the ruins of the Gamma Lab, not with anger, but with a terrifying, all-consuming excitement. Hawk had no idea he had just become the new obsession of General Ross, the man who had once chased Bruce Banner across the globe. But even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Because Hawk was already gone. He wasn't just out of Quantico, he wasn't even in the DC area anymore. Right now, Hawk was at the bottom of a waterfall. Roar. The water thundered down, a relentless, liquid avalanche. It crashed onto the figure of Hawk, who was sitting cross-legged in the churning pool, wearing only a pair of shorts, his eyes closed. But as the water, heavy as falling rock, slammed into his body, it seemed to vaporize on impact, shrouding him in a cloud of white mist. He was in Cunningham Falls State Park, deep in the mountains of Maryland. It was a place few people ever ventured. Hawk had been here for over 20 days. And for 20 days, he had been doing only one thing. Burning his cosmo. Within his inner universe, the star chart of the Phoenix constellation now blazed with a brilliant light, the phantom image of a fiery bird shimmering within it. He wasn't in a rush to return to New York. For one thing, the school summer session hadn't started yet. For another, he wanted to let the dust settle. Hawk was curious to see if the military, after the mess he'd made at Quantico, could actually find him here. If they couldn't, he would head back to New York. And if they could, he wasn't worried. He had chosen this spot for a reason. 5 miles in any direction was nothing but dense forest. It was the perfect place for a battle. The perfect place to kill. Some people only respect force. You can't reason with them, you can only beat them into submission. You have to break them, instill a fear so deep that obedience becomes their only option. You know what they say. When the US military accuses you of having weapons of mass destruction, you damn well better have them. Why? Because if you truly have them, no one will risk laying a hand on you. But if you're just bluffing, well, then they're going to come at you with everything they've got. So, Hawk had deliberately chosen this remote location as his potential battlefield. If the military found him, the war would start here. He would break them, crush their will to fight, and then casually head back to New York. But 20 days had passed. He hadn't seen a single soldier. He hadn't seen a single person at all. It didn't matter. His primary reason for being here wasn't to wait for the military. It was the waterfall itself. Hawk was using the relentless, crushing force of the water to push himself past his limits, to finally and completely ignite the Phoenix star chart within his cosmo. For the past 20 days, his routine had been simple. During the day, he would throw his 10,000 punches against the crushing resistance of the waterfall. At night, he would shut down his 5 senses, sit cross-legged in the pool, and let the 24/7 torrent of water hammer against his body, while he reached inward, searching for the door to the 6th sense. Technically, a bronze saint wasn't considered a true saint. The legendary 5 were the exception, of course. Only a saint who had awakened and mastered the 6th sense was worthy of the title. Hawk wasn't expecting to master it now. That was unrealistic. But he had time. And if he was lucky, he might just brush against the edges of it. The sixth sense was a game changer. A saint with the sixth sense and a saint without it were on completely different levels of existence. It was the gateway to true power. With it, a saint could manipulate the elements, see the future, move objects with their mind, fly, create illusions, the possibilities were endless. But alas, forget awakening it. He hadn't even found the doorknob. Hawk slowly opened his eyes. He rose from the water, his body as immovable as a mountain, the crushing weight of the waterfall having no effect on him. His blood was boiling, a furnace of heat radiating from his skin, turning the surrounding water into a cloud of steam. And within that cloud, the fiery, spectral image of a phoenix shimmered into existence behind him. Yes, the phoenix. In the 20-plus days he had been here, the military hadn't come, and he hadn't found the gateway to the sixth sense. But he had accomplished his main objective. Hawk had successfully ignited his first constellation. One of the 48 bronze constellations. The Phoenix. The next second, Hawk looked at the curtain of falling water before him and threw his first punch of the day. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. 36 A meeting under the inverted waterfall bonus. Thank you for 600 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. One punch. Then another. And another. Standing at the base of the waterfall, Hawk braced himself against the crushing torrent of water, his fists lashing out against the immense resistance. With every punch, the wall of water would momentarily buckle, freezing in place for a fraction of a second. But it wasn't enough. He didn't just want the waterfall to pause for him. He wanted it to tremble. He wanted it to reverse its flow. Hawk didn't think he was asking for much. This wasn't Niagara Falls. Compared to the great waterfalls of the world, this one was a trickle. So, was it too much to ask? No, not at all. But clearly, the waterfall disagreed. Do you think you're Poseidon? And even if you were, what good would that do? He's the god of the sea. What jurisdiction does he have over a freshwater waterfall? And so, the waterfall, enraged by Hawk's relentless assault, began to flow with even greater fury, its speed visibly increasing. Hawk felt the shift, the raw anger of the water, but his expression remained unchanged. Deep within his cosmo, the fully ignited phoenix star chart pulsed with light. A fiery phoenix was slowly, majestically, taking form. He had made his decision. He would leave this place when this waterfall reversed its course, and not a moment sooner. He only had a few days left before school started. A burning, defiant light ignited in Hawk's eyes. Come on. Quote. Was that thunder? Miles away, on the northern edge of Cunningham Falls State Park, Gwen, who had just entered the forest, heard the distant roar and looked up at the sky. But the dense canopy of the ancient trees blocked her view, allowing only dappled sunlight to filter through. The shifting patterns of light and shadow gave the already quiet forest an eerie, almost mystical quality. Unable to see the sky, Gwen looked back down. Dressed in a bright white windbreaker and a pair of hiking boots, Gwen pulled out her phone and looked at the screen. A tracking map was open. 2 pulsing dots, far apart, but now close enough to be seen on the same screen. One was her current location. The other. Gwen took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the hiking pole she had bought in Thermont the day before, and steeled herself. She started walking again, heading directly for the second dot. At first, Gwen had just assumed Hawk's phone had been stolen. She tried not to worry. She had been busy with her own summer internship after all. The next day, Dr. Connors had asked if she had given Hawk the gift, and she'd realized something was wrong. After work, she'd gone back to Hawk's apartment. And the envelope she had left on his table was still there, untouched. But for reasons she couldn't explain, a sudden, cold panic seized her heart. She had immediately called her father and asked him to use his resources at the NYPD to find Hawk. At first, her father hadn't been too concerned, but seeing the genuine fear in Gwen's eyes, he had agreed to make a call to his colleagues in the Queen's precinct. He was the captain of the 19th Precinct in Manhattan. Technically, a missing persons case in Queens was out of his jurisdiction, but a friendly call to a fellow captain was all it took. The result? Nothing. It was as if Hawk had vanished from the face of the earth. He had no credit cards, no driver's license, and his phone was either stolen or dead. There was no way to track him. To put it bluntly, Hawk was a ghost living in the modern world. No family. No social life. He didn't even seem to have any friends. Even after opening a case file, the Queen's precinct had no idea where to even begin their investigation. No one could provide a last known location. When they questioned a few of his classmates, no one seemed particularly concerned that he was gone. Well, except Gwen. 2 nights ago, her father had come home to find her just getting back, looking exhausted from another day of searching. He had finally asked the question he'd been holding back. Gwen, are you in love with this boy? Gwen, who had just come from a cemetery in Queens, froze, then gave him her answer. Dad, Hawk and I are just friends. Quote. By the time her father had processed her words, she was already halfway up the stairs. George had blinked, then looked at his wife, Helen, who had been standing quietly by. Friends. Do you believe that? It doesn't matter if I believe it or not. Helen, ever the wise and gentle mother, had smiled at her daughter's retreating back. But one thing I know, she's no longer just a little girl. George was speechless. Up in her room, Gwen had thrown herself onto her bed, her mind filled with a gnawing, nameless feeling as she thought about Hawk, who had now been missing for over a week. Just then, her phone had buzzed. She had glanced at it, expecting another spam text. But then, her eyes had gone wide. It wasn't spam. It was another security alert from her phone provider. She had frantically clicked the link. This time, it wasn't a general location. It was a precise GPS coordinate. Cunningham Falls State Park, Maryland. At the base of a waterfall. And that was why Gwen was here now. Soon. As the roar of the water grew louder, a surge of adrenaline cut through her exhaustion. Drenched in sweat, Gwen pushed herself, quickening her pace. Back at the base of the falls. Hawk had just thrown his 9,999th punch. He drew his fist back one last time. The fiery silhouette of the phoenix behind him solidified, becoming almost real. The next second, he unleashed his 10,000th punch. The fiery phoenix behind him spread its wings and soared. Scree. Flow. Backwards. Boom. The waterfall no longer plunged downward. It roared to a halt, then surged upward, reversing its course into the sky. In that moment, it was as if time itself had frozen. But a single sound cut through the impossible silence. A voice. Clear. And trembling. Hawk. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 37 Gwen. If I want to find you, I'll find you bonus. Thank you for 700 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. First of all, thank you so much for the incredible support, seriously, I'm speechless and truly honored. Second, I want to apologize for all the issues you've encountered so far, whether it's character development, plot points. Starting from this chapter, I've invested much more time into editing, a lot more time, for improved quality. Consider it another way of saying thank you for this amazing support. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Countless shattered droplets of water hung in the air around Hawk, spinning and orbiting him as if paying homage. The world was utterly silent. The only sound was a single voice, calling his name from behind. Hawk. The word sent a jolt through him, and his bare chest, which had been rising and falling steadily, hitched for a second. Hawk instinctively turned, and saw her. She emerged from the forest, dressed in a windbreaker. Her blonde hair was a mess, her face beaded with sweat, but her blue eyes, when they locked with his, were filled with a brilliant, overwhelming joy. Gwen. Hawk froze. He couldn't believe it. Somehow, the first person to find him here wasn't the United States military. It was Gwen. How was that even possible? His mind reeled. And in that moment, time, which had been frozen, lurched back into motion. ROOOAR. The inverted waterfall collapsed, crashing down once more. But this time, the sound was softer, more subdued. It was as if the waterfall itself was afraid of making too much noise and inviting another cataclysm. After all, Hawk had proven he could make it bend to his will. At the same time, Gwen, seeing him standing there, began to run. She didn't know why she was running, she had already found him, but her body just took over. In the blink of an eye, she had reached the edge of the pool, and without hesitation, she plunged into the water, wading toward him. The next second, she threw her arms around him, holding on tight. Hawk's arms instinctively wrapped around her, pulling her into his embrace, his body shielding her from the punishing force of the waterfall. And then, he remembered. With a nearly silent whoosh, they vanished from the pool, reappearing an instant later on the grassy bank. A thick cloud of steam, like a pillar of smoke, rose from Hawk's body and from Gwen's now drenched clothes. In a single, breathtaking moment, the immense heat radiating from Hawk's body vaporized the water, leaving them both completely dry. Hawk looked down at Gwen, who was still clinging to him tightly. He opened his mouth, wanting to ask how she had found him when the entire United States military couldn't. But, he saw that she had fallen asleep, a faint, soft snore escaping her lips. He closed his mouth, then slowly sat down on the ground, cradling her in his lap. He didn't speak. He just watched her sleep, his gaze soft. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of blonde hair from her face. About half an hour later. Gwen's eyes slowly fluttered open. Still groggy, she thought she was in her bed and instinctively started to stretch. The next second, she saw Hawk, looking down at her. Their eyes met. Gwen blinked. Hawk smiled. Hello. Holy shit. With a gasp, Gwen scrambled out of his lap, her pale cheeks flushing a deep shade of pink. Hawk rose to his feet, stretching his limbs, which had gone stiff from holding still for so long. Gwen, after a quick, disoriented glance at her surroundings, focused her attention back on him. He stood before her, wearing only a pair of shorts, his body like that of a Greek statue. His sharp, intelligent eyes were framed by a pair of strong, confident brows. They were the same brows she had always known. But before, they had been like a sword in its sheath. Now, they were like a newly forged blade, drawn and ready. Gwen stared, momentarily captivated. The next second, she snapped out of it. A playful, knowing smile spread across her face. The library. Studying. Ha. Quote. Hawk's brow twitched. He heard the gentle accusation in her teasing tone. After a moment, he said, sorry. Gwen's smile widened. She had heard the note of complaint in her own voice, and she had heard something new in his apology. Before, when he had said he was sorry, it had been a dismissal, a way to end a conversation. But this time, a corner of her mouth turned up. She held out her hand. Hawk looked at it, confused. Gwen said, why didn't you answer my calls? Hawk walked over to where he had left his clothes, picked up the phone that had been sitting on his neatly folded t-shirt, and handed it to her. I've been out here for over 20 days. The battery's been dead for weeks. Gwen paused, then took the phone. Sure enough, the screen was black. But, she blinked. An idea struck her. She pulled out her own phone, still holding his, and clicked on the link from the security alert. Link has expired. Gwen stared at the screen, momentarily stunned. The link that had been active just a moment ago was now gone. At that moment, Hawk finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. By the way, Gwen, how did you know I was here? Quote. Gwen snapped out of her thoughts. She casually put her own phone back in her pocket, handed his back to him, and smiled. My dad's a police captain, Hawk. If I want to find you, I'll find you. Hawk just blinked. That line was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. He'd have to be crazy to believe that. But looking at Gwen, who was trying so hard to look confident, a faint blush still dusting her cheeks, Hawk's expression softened into one of dawning realization. He gave a slow nod. He decided to let it go. A moment ago, he had been desperate to know how she had found him. But now, he realized he didn't care. No. The moment he'd seen her lying asleep in his arms, the question had ceased to matter. Maybe it was just as she said. She was the daughter of a police captain. If she wanted to find him, she could. That was her story. And Hawk decided to believe it. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 9 comments 0 vote. 38 bringing home the wild animal bonus. Thank you for 800 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. New York, John F. Kennedy International Airport. George Stacy of the NYPD's 19th Precinct was pacing back and forth near the arrivals gate, feeling like he was about to lose his mind. This was it. The day he'd always dreaded. His little girl, the precious daughter he had raised so carefully, was finally being snatched away by some animal. And a wild one at that. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that, from the looks of it, his daughter was the one who had gone looking for the animal. George couldn't understand it. But at this point, it didn't matter. Right now, only one thought consumed him. He wanted to put a bullet in the punk who had stolen his little girl. Just then, the passengers from the flight from Hagerstown, Maryland, began to deplane. George stopped his pacing, took a deep breath, and stood by the gate, his eyes fixed on the passengers emerging from the jet bridge. A moment later, his breathing hitched, sharp and ragged in his chest. Jesus Christ. What was he seeing? His baby girl was walking out, hand in hand with some handsome punk. George's face went dark. The other people waiting nearby felt a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air. They glanced at George, then instinctively took a few steps away. Finally, the new couple, fresh off the plane and still in the early days of their relationship, felt a wave of pure hostility crash over them. Gwen looked up, saw the source of the cold front, and immediately let go of Hawk's hand. Shit. It's my dad. Hawk had already seen him. George Stacy, standing at the gate, dressed in a black suit, his normally stoic face radiating a dangerous cold. Their eyes met. Hawk could feel the captain's gaze on him, suspicious, analytical, and utterly hostile. It was to be expected. Hawk figured that if his own daughter had run off without a word and come back with some guy, he'd probably be even angrier than George Stacy. Breaking the punk's legs would be letting him off easy. What's that? He's the punk in this scenario. Oh. Right. Never mind. Hawk thought to himself. To be honest, Hawk was still a little fuzzy on how he and Gwen had ended up holding hands. The memories were a blur. But he was happy. It was just like he'd thought before. Hawk had never been against the idea of a relationship, especially with Gwen Stacy, the undisputed #1 girlfriend in all of comics. He had always felt out of her league. But now, he wasn't. And once he got his hands on that meteorite, got the vibranium from Wakanda, and forged his Phoenix armor, he'd own the whole damn league. So, Hawk watched as Gwen ran ahead to her father, grabbing his arm. His own expression remained calm. He walked right up to Captain Stacy, met his glare without flinching, and extended his right hand. Mr. Stacy. I'm Hawk. I'm sorry for worrying you. Quote. George didn't speak. He didn't shake Hawk's hand. He just glanced at it, then completely ignored him and looked at Gwen. Let's go. Your mother's waiting. Dad. It's okay, Gwen. Hawk smoothly retracted his hand, his expression unchanged. You should go with your father. He understood. He didn't blame George for not shaking his hand. Right now, even if the man had tried to punch him, he would have just dodged. He wouldn't have fought back. Hawk gave Gwen a small, reassuring smile, said a final, goodbye, Mr. Stacy, and then walked away, not wanting to make things any more difficult for her. Hawk was back at his apartment near Queensbridge Park. He flipped on the light. He had expected to find the place covered in a thick layer of dust after being away for over 20 days. But it was clean. Even the shorts he had left hanging in the window were now neatly folded on the sofa. And on top of them was an envelope. This must be the gift from Dr. Connors that Gwen had mentioned on the phone. Hawk sat down on the sofa, picked up the envelope, and pulled out a handwritten letter. It was a letter of recommendation to New York University, written by Dr. Connors himself. Hawk had forgotten. Dr. Connors was an NYU alumnus. Hiss. Damn. This is a pretty big deal. Hawk blinked. Honestly, the letter was impressive. A recommendation from a scientist of Dr. Connors' stature was more than just a nice gesture, it was the kind of thing that could open doors. Other students would kill for something like this. A letter of recommendation was a form of social currency, a personal endorsement. So, if Hawk had received this letter before he had awakened his Cosmo, he would have been ecstatic. But now, he didn't really care if he got into NYU or not. He wasn't planning on dropping out of school, but his perspective had shifted. If it happens, great. If not, that's fine too. He could see a different, more brilliant future laid out before him now. However, he still owed Dr. Connors a thank you call. Hawk turned the envelope over. Gwen had written Dr. Connors' number on the back. He pulled out his phone, saw the black screen, and chuckled. He stood up and walked into the bedroom. Hawk plugged his phone into the charger and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for it to power on. As he waited, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that the picture frame on his nightstand had been moved slightly. Hawk raised an eyebrow. He reached over and carefully adjusted the frame, angling it back toward his pillow. It was a habit. He slept on his side, and with the frame positioned just so, there was a 70% chance it would be the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes in the morning. There. Perfect. Hawk smiled, then looked at his now powered-in phone and dialed Dr. Connors' number. The call connected quickly. Curtis Connors speaking. Dr. Connors, it's Hawk. Hawk introduced himself, then apologized for the delay, explaining that he had been out of town and had just gotten back and seen the letter. Dr. Connors sounded genuinely pleased to hear from him. After a few minutes of pleasantries, Hawk asked casually, "You sound like you're in a good mood, doctor. Did the experiment finally succeed?" Dr. Connors laughed. "Almost. One of the test mice showed me the breakthrough is within reach." Well, congratulations in advance, doctor. Thank you, Hawk. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work. Of course. Take care. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 39 dinner with Stacy family bonus. Thank you for 900 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. For real. It was a success. Hawk hung up the phone after his call with Dr. Connors, a feeling of genuine surprise washing over him. After all, he had assumed that in a world with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man but no Andrew Garfield version, Dr. Connors' regeneration experiment was doomed to fail. But it seemed. Hawk stood up and walked out of his bedroom, his mind replaying the conversation. Dr. Connors had been ecstatic, so he'd shared a few more details with Hawk. During the latest trial with the lab mice, they had expected the same result as all the previous attempts, failure. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the lab mice, after being injected with the lizard serum, had flatlined. But a few minutes later, its life signs had reappeared. Not only that, but the tail it had lost during an escape attempt last month began to regrow at a visible rate. The discovery had left Dr. Connors absolutely thrilled. Hawk thought it was fascinating. But the feeling only lasted for a moment. He sat down at his folding table, opened the second-hand, gently used by a pretty girl, laptop he'd bought from Sky for $500, and pushed the thought of Dr. Connors' success to the back of his mind. He was far more interested in the situation at Quantico. Soon, after a quick search online, Hawk's expression grew strange once again. No intrusion. Only a training exercise. A DC newspaper had reported on the alarms at the Quantico base. But in the article, a base spokesperson denied any such intrusion, stating that it had simply been a routine training exercise. Unfortunately, during the exercise, a building had unexpectedly collapsed, and a dozen soldiers had been tragically killed. Yep, Quantico was covering it up. It was to be expected. This was Quantico, home of the U.S. military, right next door to the FBI Academy, a stone's throw from the CIA's headquarters in Langley. Under those circumstances, there was no way in hell the military would ever admit that one of their most secure bases had been breached. As for anything else, Hawk searched, but found nothing. There were no reports about the body of the young driver he'd killed. Either he hadn't been found yet, or his death simply wasn't newsworthy. After all, a lot of nobodies died for a lot of reasons every single day. A nameless, faceless punk disappearing without a trace wasn't going to make the headlines. Hawk shook his head, closed the laptop, and went back to his bedroom to sleep. The next morning, Hawk was woken up by his phone. He opened his eyes, saw the familiar picture frame on his nightstand, and then reached for the phone, which was still charging. Hello. Come downstairs. Quote. Hawk's brain took a second to reboot. He sat up, pulled on a t-shirt, and walked to the living room window. He looked down and saw her, standing across the street next to her yellow Corolla, waving up at him. Gwen. Oh, right. His girlfriend Gwen. It still felt unreal. Let me say that again. Gwen Stacy is my girlfriend. Hawk thought to himself, a slow smile spreading across his face. He waved back, then hung up and headed for the door. A few moments later, he emerged from the building, crossed the street, and walked up to her. What's up? Are you free tonight? My mom wants you to come over for dinner. Hawk's mind raced. He looked at the hopeful, expectant look in Gwen's eyes and, after a moment, nodded. Okay. So, what are you doing now? Probably head to the library. Do some reading. Quote. Hawk saw the look on Gwen's face, a gentle, knowing smile, and let out a small laugh. No, for real this time. I'm actually going to the library. School started tomorrow after all. Senior year. The last year of high school. If things went according to plan, the admissions officers from NYU would be coming by this semester for final interviews and to confirm scholarships. He might have acted like he didn't care if he got into NYU or not. But if he could, he still wanted to go. It had been his dream, before all of this, to study law at NYU, to become a prosecutor, maybe even a judge. And he had worked his ass off for the past 3 years to make it happen. Gwen studied his face for a moment, then her own broke into a brilliant smile. Then let's go. Where? To the library, right. I have to go too. We can study, and then I can give you a ride home. But first, you have to come with me to Oscorp. Get in. Hawk watched as she walked around to the driver's side, opened her door, and gestured for him to get in. He didn't hesitate, pulling open the passenger door and sliding into the seat. Just as he'd said, he really was going to the library to study today. It was all about work-life balance. Deep within his cosmo, the Phoenix star chart glowed, a spectral phoenix shimmering within it. The brilliant, chaotic energy of the gamanium he had absorbed from Quantico swirled through the constellation. The Phoenix was still working, improving the raw power. They spent the entire day together. After a quick stop at Oscorp, they went to the library and studied in comfortable silence. He was aiming for NYU. She was aiming for Berkeley. They were both working toward their futures. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 22 comments 0 vote. 40 Gwen's two little brothers. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Manhattan, the Goring Building. Helen Stacy, who had been a devoted wife and mother ever since she married George Stacy, was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Her two sons, 9-year-old Howard and 8-year-old Simon, Gwen's younger brothers, were in the living room, watching TV as if their lives depended on it. Yes. Because the moment their mother was free, she would march them off to do their homework. As Helen often said, your sister Gwen is so smart. You all came from the same place, you should be smart too. In reality, Howard and Simon weren't bad students, but they were perpetually hovering right on the edge of a passing grade, and sometimes, they slipped. Case in point, their final exams this year had been a disaster. As a result, Helen had cut their daily hour of screen time in half. Just then, the doorbell rang. Howard, Simon, time to go to your rooms and study, Helen called out from the kitchen. Quote. Okay. Helen walked into the living room, gave her two sons a pointed look, and then watched as they trudged upstairs to their rooms. She went to the front door and opened it. Standing on the other side, Hawk smiled at the woman who opened the door, a woman whose first impression was one of pure, gentle warmth. Good evening, Mrs. Stacy. Helen's eyes widened in a welcoming smile. Good evening, Hawk. Please, come in. Hawk said his thanks and was immediately pulled inside by Gwen. This was the first time in this life that Hawk had ever been a guest in someone else's home. Gwen's apartment was on the top floor, a two-story duplex. It wasn't massive, but every corner of it exuded a sense of warmth and tidiness. Hearing the voices downstairs, George Stacy descended from his second-floor study, his face a mask of stern disapproval. Gwen, who had been introducing Hawk to her mother, heard the footsteps on the stairs. Dad. Hawk looked up and gave a respectful nod. Mr. Stacy. George's expression was severe, his posture rigid. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to smile. But at least this was better than yesterday. This time, he actually grunted in acknowledgement before walking past them to the dining table without another word. Helen just shook her head with an amused smile. Hawk, please, have a seat. Dinner's ready. Hawk said his thanks again and followed Gwen to the table. He gave another slight nod to George, who was now seated across from him, and took his own seat. Helen then called upstairs. Howard, Simon, dinner. Coming. The two boys, who had been waiting for this moment, came thundering down the stairs. They stopped short when they saw the stranger at their dining table, then slowly took their seats, their eyes fixed on Hawk. Hawk met their gaze and extended his right hand to the older boy. Hi, Howard. I'm Hawk. I'm Howard. I'm Simon. 8-year-old Simon stood up, shook Hawk's hand with his own small one, and then looked up at him, his eyes wide with curiosity. Are you my sister's boyfriend? Quote. Hawk's eyes flickered to George. Yep. The captain's face had gone several shades darker. Hawk smiled and nodded at the young, blonde-haired boy. I am. At that, George's face went even darker. Gwen, however, just smiled and ruffled her little brother's hair. Nice one, little bro. She decided she'd give him $10 before bed as a reward. Howard, on the other hand, would get nothing. The dinner was served in typical American fashion, individual plates, not family style. This was probably George's doing. After all, Hawk was an outsider. Unless you were a lifelong family friend, the first time you came to dinner, it was always formal. Hawk understood. But regardless of how it was served, the food was excellent. This was, without a doubt, the best meal he had eaten in this life. The school cafeteria food didn't even count. And when he was alone, Hawk never cared about flavor or presentation. He just ate to fill his stomach, because just surviving was hard enough. At the dinner table, George presided like a silent, watchful patriarch, eating his meal without a word. Helen was occasionally asking Hawk if he was enjoying the food and making light, easy conversation. Gwen acted as a buffer between her mother and her boyfriend, while also keeping a wary eye on her father, half expecting him to explode at any moment. Howard and Simon just happily ate their food. Just then, George picked up his glass of whiskey, took a sip, and cleared his throat. In an instant, all eyes were on him. Here we go again. Hawk thought to himself, his own gaze shifting to meet the captain's, who had been watching him out of the corner of his eye the entire meal. Just as George was about to speak, Helen caught the desperate, pleading look in Gwen's eyes. She hid a smile and cut in first. So, George, tell us about work. That Spider-Man, have you caught him yet? George shot a look at his wife, then at Gwen, and finally, his eyes settled on Hawk. Not yet. But we will. He's an amateur, and he's leaving clues everywhere. With that, without giving Helen or Gwen another chance to interrupt, he turned his full attention to Hawk. So, Hawk, what's your take on this new Spider-Man? Do you think he's some kind of vigilante? Under the table, Gwen's hand gently squeezed Hawk's thigh. Hawk got the message. He just smiled and shook his head. Sir, I've been in Maryland for the past few weeks. I just got back yesterday, and I spent all day at the library. Honestly, I'm just a student. My only concern right now is getting a scholarship to NYU so the bank will approve my student loan application. As for this Spider-Man, I don't really care if he's a vigilante or just some idiot looking for attention. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 41 New semester, new classmate bonus. Thank you for the 1000 PS milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. After Hawk spoke, he could feel Gwen's hand tighten on his leg again. He had gotten her signal. It was a trap. George's question was a trap. Who was George Stacy? The captain of the NYPD's 19th precinct. If Hawk were to call Spider-Man a vigilante, in George's eyes, it would be no different from defending a criminal. Gwen's signal was a warning. Don't fall for it. Answer the question in a way that would satisfy a police captain. But, if Hawk had called Spider-Man a criminal, he would have come across as a pathetic suck-up. So, the question wasn't really a question. It was a known scenario. Whichever answer he chose would be the wrong one. So between A and B, Hawk had chosen C. He'd sidestepped the trap entirely. He was just a student. He didn't care if Spider-Man was a hero or a villain. He only cared about getting his scholarship to NYU. That's it. If anyone else had given that answer, it might have come across as evasive. But coming from Hawk, it was perfect. Why? Because Hawk was betting that George Stacy had already run a full background check on him. And he wasn't afraid of what he'd find. Because he hadn't just said it, it was how he lived. He practiced what he preached. The only inconsistency was that, after a lifetime of pinching pennies and never leaving New York City, he had suddenly taken a trip to Maryland. But that was easy enough to explain. He was a kid. He went on a vacation. It's not like he was out committing crimes. Well, at least during his intensive training in Maryland, he hadn't done anything illegal. Besides, every state had its own jurisdiction. What he did in Washington, D.C. had nothing to do with him now that he was back in New York. After his answer, the look on George Stacy's face shifted from surprise to something else, a grudging respect. He nodded, and with that, the dinner was effectively over. 9 o'clock that night. Gwen walked Hawk to the door of her building. She smiled. Get home safe. I'm sorry I can't drive you. She was grounded. Not by George, but by Helen. It was her punishment for running off to Maryland without telling anyone. Normally, Gwen was free to come and go as she pleased before 10. But yesterday, Helen had moved her curfew up to 9. It's fine. The subway's fast enough. Okay. See you tomorrow. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Hawk watched her go back inside, then turned and walked toward the subway station. If the New York City subway was a chaotic circus during the day, then at night, it was a zombie apocalypse. You couldn't expect a transit system where fare evasion was a citywide sport to be particularly well managed. As a general rule, New Yorkers avoided the subway at night unless they had no other choice. But Hawk wasn't too worried. On the ride back to his apartment, he only had to knock out one tweaker and scare off 2 wannabe rappers who decided to perform in his face. All in all, he made it home without any real trouble. When he got home, Hawk saw a text from Gwen. He replied, then went straight to bed. School starts tomorrow. He wanted to get up early to catch the free school bus. Gwen had offered to pick him up on her way. But he had refused. If he accepted, Hawk felt like it would create the impression that he was only dating Gwen so he could bum a ride from her. He knew that wasn't the case. But he couldn't control what other people thought. And while he didn't care what they thought about him, he had to consider how it would look for Gwen. The next morning, Hawk was waiting at the bus stop when the familiar orange school bus pulled up. The driver was the same as always, the burly, bearded Mr. Hall, who looked like a biker but had the heart of a teddy bear. Morning, Mr. Hall. Morning, Hawk. Ready for your last semester. I won't graduate until next year, Mr. Hall. You might get that NYU acceptance letter this semester. I've got faith in you, kid. All right. Thanks, Mr. Hall. Don't mention it. Hawk made his way to his usual seat in the back. The bus continued on its route, picking up a student or two at every stop. When it reached the Forest Hills stop, a familiar face got on. The moment he stepped on the bus, Peter Parker's spider sense must have tingled. He immediately looked toward the back and saw Hawk, sitting alone by the window. At the same time, Hawk looked up and saw Peter, and the boy standing next to him, who had a distinctly melancholy aura about him. Is that Harry Osborn? And not just any Harry Osborn. The James Franco version, the one who had beaten Peter to the punch with Mary Jane. Peter said something to his friend, who had just transferred to Midtown from a school in England, and then led him down the aisle toward Hawk. Hawk. Peter. Hawk, this is Harry. He was studying in England, but he just transferred here. He's a senior, like us. Harry, this is Hawk. Harry Osborn, not yet the Green Goblin, just a handsome kid in a blazer, smiled and extended his hand. Nice to meet you, Hawk. Likewise, Harry. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 42 cheerleader Captain Jennifer. Bonus. Thank you for the 1000 PS milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. On the bus ride to Midtown Tech, Hawk learned how Peter and Harry had met. Not that he didn't already know. Peter's parents, back when they were still alive, had been scientists at Oscorp Industries. Both of them. Because of their work, they often had to bring Peter with them to the lab. That's where he had met Harry. They had become fast friends. After Peter's parents died in a plane crash, he had stopped going to Oscorp, but Harry, who already considered him a close friend, would still come to visit whenever he could. They had never lost touch. Even in high school, when Harry was away at boarding school in England, they had kept in constant contact. And now, here he was. Today was Harry's first day at Midtown, and the first thing he'd done was go and find his best friend. Harry was thrilled to be reunited with his old friend, and even more thrilled that they would be going to school together. Peter was just as happy. This was the best news he'd had in the 2 months since his uncle Ben had passed away. Yes, Ben Parker was still dead. He had been killed just a few days into summer vacation. And because of that, New York City had gained a new, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. When Hawk heard the news, he paused for a moment, then offered his condolences. I'm sorry for your loss. It's okay. Peter managed a small smile. His Uncle Ben's death had taught him one thing. With great power comes great responsibility. So, these days, whenever he was out there, doing what he did, he could almost feel his uncle by his side. And that made the pain a little easier to bear. The bus continued on its route. About half an hour later, now packed with students, it pulled into the parking lot of Midtown Tech. The doors opened, and students began to file off. Hey, morning, Gwen. Morning, Liz. Gwen, long time no see. You too. Gwen, please tell me we have a homecoming dance. We do. It's tradition, Mark. Gwen was already in the parking lot, leaning against her car. She smiled and greeted her classmates as they got out of their cars or off the buses arriving from all over the city. Just then, Hawk, following Peter and the new kid, Harry, stepped off the bus, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Gwen's eyes lit up. She was about to walk over to him, but then, in a flash, someone else appeared in front of him. A girl with a waterfall of long, dark hair. Jennifer Check. From Jennifer's Body, played by Megan Fox. The captain of the cheerleading squad. Seductive, beautiful, with a pair of captivating, fox-like eyes that drew everyone's attention. Gwen instinctively stopped, her brow furrowing. Hey, Gwen. Mary Jane Watson, who had just gotten out of her own car, walked up and tapped her on the shoulder. What are you staring at? Mary Jane followed Gwen's gaze. She saw Jennifer, dressed in a revealing outfit that showed off her perfect figure, standing directly in front of Hawk. Ah, Jennifer. Wow, she really hasn't given up, has she? Mary Jane rolled her eyes. Is she really trying to get the asked Hawk to every dance for 4 years, every semester, achievement? Standing next to her, Gwen's voice was cool. It's not just every semester. Huh. Mary Jane looked at her, confused. Gwen's voice was low and dangerous. She asked him to prom in June too. He said no. Like he would ever go to a dance anyway, Mary Jane shot back. Then she paused, a look of realization dawning on her face. She turned to look at Gwen. Gwen didn't say anything. She just narrowed her eyes, her gaze fixed on Hawk, and Jennifer Check, who was now smiling brightly at him. Hey, Hawk. Happy new semester. You too, Jennifer. Hawk smiled back at the girl who had materialized in front of him the second he'd stepped off the bus. He had a pretty good idea of what she wanted. After all, she did this at the start of every school year, asking the same question. But he wasn't going to jump the gun. What if he guessed wrong, and that wasn't what she was here for? Jennifer fixed him with her captivating gaze. Hawk, you said no in 9th grade, you said no in 10th grade, and you said no in 11th grade. This is 12th grade. Our last year. You can't say no again. As the captain of the cheer squad, Jennifer had no shortage of admirers. And she never missed a dance. But none of her dates had ever been Hawk. Maybe, back in 9th grade, she had just been drawn to his handsome, brooding loner vibe. But after he had rejected her that first time, it had become an obsession. She knew he would probably say no. But what if? If he said yes, it would be the ultimate validation of her own desirability. After all, for the past 3 years, it was a well-known fact that Hawk never, ever went to parties. Unfortunately for her, there was no, what if. Hawk shook his head. Jennifer, you know I don't go to dances. But if you did, you'd ask me to be your date, right? Yes, if I went. But I'm not going. That's all I needed to hear, Hawk. Goodbye. That was the answer Jennifer had been looking for. What I can't have, no one else can have either. That was enough. As long as he wasn't going with someone else, her reputation remained intact. Having gotten what she wanted, Jennifer leaned in, gave Hawk a quick, lingering kiss on the cheek, and then, with a cheerful wave, walked away. Quote. Hawk watched her leave in a whirlwind of perfume and confidence, then shook his head. He turned to Gwen, who was still standing by her car, and started toward her. Gwen watched him approach, a small, unreadable smile on her face. She asked you to the dance. Yep. Did you say yes? Nope. Oh. Quote. Jennifer check image. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. 43 prelude to the lizard bonus. Thank you for the 1000 ps milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Hawk and Gwen exchanged a few more words. Their voices carried no tension, expressions perfectly at ease. They walked side by side toward the main hallway, leaving a trail of stunned silence in their wake. Behind them, Mary Jane's jaw was on the floor. Holy shit. What the hell did I miss this summer? Peter was just as dumbfounded. He felt like he understood what was happening, but at the same time, he felt like he understood nothing at all. Harry, on the other hand, just saw an opportunity. He turned to Mary Jane, a charming smile on his face. He remembered her as Peter's neighbor from back before he'd left for the UK. He'd seen her around whenever he came to visit Peter. He tapped her on the shoulder. Hey, Mary Jane. Long time no see. Quote. Hey, Harry. Mary Jane turned, gave him a distracted glance, and then immediately looked back at Peter. Peter, did you know about this? Harry froze. Wait, that's not the right reaction. Is that how you greet an old friend you haven't seen in years? A little cold, don't you think? Peter was just as taken aback. He met Mary Jane's intense, searching gaze. Know about what? Gwen and Hawk. Mary Jane was practically vibrating with the need to gossip, struggling to keep her voice down. Aren't you, like, Hawk's only friend at this school? You have to know something. When did this happen? Peter was completely lost. Since when am I Hawk's ONL? Forget it. You're useless. Mary Jane, frustrated by his cluelessness, gave up. She was going to get the scoop, one way or another. The next second, her face lit up. Oh my god. Mary Jane shrieked as recognition finally dawned. She rushed over and threw her arms around the still gloomy Harry. Harry. When did you get back? Harry's face lit up. He smiled as she pulled away, ready to catch up. But Mary Jane just gave him another quick hug. I have to go right now, I'll talk to you later, bye. Clearly, at this moment, catching up with an old friend from overseas was nowhere near as important as getting the dirt on her best friend and the school's #1 ice king. With that, Mary Jane spun around and took off at a jog, chasing after Gwen, who was about to disappear into the lounge. Obviously, she wasn't about to go interrogate Hawk. And so, for the rest of the morning, Mary Jane followed Gwen around like a lost puppy. Her plea was simple and relentless. Please, just tell me a little more. The details. I'm begging you, Gwen. Quote. Since it was the first day of the new semester, the schedule was relaxed. No actual classes. Students were busy picking up their new schedules or meeting with their guidance counselors for last-minute advice. Which meant Gwen was stuck dealing with Mary Jane's relentless pestering all morning. Finally, on their way to the cafeteria, Gwen looked at her friend, who was still giving her the most pathetic, desperate puppy dog eyes, and she broke. Gwen sighed. Seriously, is it really that weird that Hawk and I are together? Yes. Why? We've sat next to each other in physics since 9th grade. We have the same counselor. Gwen, please. It's Hawk. So, you really don't know what people say about him. What? Now it was Gwen's turn to be curious. Mary Jane looked around, then lowered her voice. Everyone says he's either a complete, hopeless straight arrow, or he's, gay. Gwen rolled her eyes. That's ridiculous. An image flashed in her mind, of Hawk, at the waterfall in Maryland, standing in the water wearing nothing but a pair of shorts. Gay. He's straight as a nightstick. Wait, what am I thinking? Gwen shook her head, mentally batting away the image of the police baton. She looked at Mary Jane, her expression serious. He's not gay. Mary Jane paused, then a sly, knowing look crossed her face. She wiggled her eyebrows. So, I take it you've sampled the goods. Quote. Gwen froze. She looked at Mary Jane's lewd, knowing smirk and took a deep breath. The next second, she turned and walked away without another word. Her mind is in the gutter. Mary Jane watched her walk away, then hurried to catch up. I'm sorry, Gwen. Forgive me. By the time Hawk got to the cafeteria, Mary Jane was still trying to pry information out of Gwen. But Gwen was ignoring her completely. Finally, seeing that she wasn't getting anywhere, Mary Jane sighed, then spotted Harry walking in with Peter. Her eyes lit up. Fine. If you won't tell me, I'll just ask Peter. With that, she grabbed her tray and, before Gwen could stop her, ran over to their table. By the time Hawk sat down with his tray across from Gwen, Mary Jane was already gone. Mary Jane done eating already. Apparently, she figured she wasn't going to get any gossip out of me, so she went to interrogate Peter. Gwen glanced over at Mary Jane, who was now pulling up a chair at Peter's table, and shook her head in exasperation. Hawk looked confused. What does Peter have to do with anything? Gwen shrugged. Probably because you two were seen together in the old gym last semester. Now everyone thinks he's your friend. Quote. Right. Hawk just laughed. He didn't bother to correct her. He just picked up his burger and started eating. Gwen had already finished her lunch. She sat with her arms folded on the table, watching him. By the way, did you call Dr. Connors to thank him? Yeah, I did. Hawk nodded, swallowing a bite of his burger. He said he had some kind of breakthrough with his experiment. He sounded really happy. Gwen blinked. A breakthrough? No way. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. 44. The Monster That Creates Monsters bonus. Thank you for 1100 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. What's wrong? You know I was at the lab yesterday morning, right? Yeah. Hawk nodded. It had been right before they'd gone to the library. He had assumed she was just there to clear her summer work schedule with Dr. Connors. But now, is there a problem with the experiment? Not with the experiment, but with the investors. You know Dr. Connors' project is a joint venture between Oscorp and the military, right? You mentioned that. The military pulled their funding. Gwen leaned in, lowering her voice. And his research has been going on for almost 2 years with no results. The board at Oscorp is starting to get impatient. Capital is a fickle beast. It will back you, fund you, and give you everything you need based on the promises you make. But if you fail to deliver the expected results, they will abandon you without a second thought. Cutting losses is the first lesson in the corporate playbook. And Dr. Connors's regeneration project was a prime example. To make matters worse, the military had already pulled out last month, citing budget cuts. They had said it was temporary, that they would reinvest once the next fiscal year's budget was approved, and had told Oscorp to just hold on. But things at Oscorp weren't exactly stable either. Rumor was that Norman Osborn, who had been secluded in his mansion for the past year battling a mysterious illness, was on his last legs. His time was running out. And it wasn't just an empty rumor. The fact that Harry Osborn had returned from the UK this summer and was now being integrated into the company's affairs, with the help of Norman's own executive assistant, Felicia Hardy, was a clear signal. The Osborn family might hold a majority stake in the company, but in this era of a dying king and a rising prince, there were always those looking to profit from the chaos of a changing of the guard. And a new king always lights a few fires to announce his reign. So, someone had proposed streamlining the research division, cutting any labs that weren't producing profitable results. Dr. Connors's lab was first on the chopping block. The military might have promised to restore funding once the Pentagon's next budget was approved, but who could guarantee that? The Department of Defense wasn't exactly known for its reliability. They've downsized the lab. They laid off 5 researchers. And I was supposed to be on that list. I saw Dr. Connors at the lab, and he didn't seem happy. That's why I was so surprised when you said he sounded excited on the phone. Gwen finished explaining the situation. Hawk wasn't really invested in whether the experiment succeeded or not. He just listened, and when she was done, he shrugged. Well, that's what he said on the phone. Who knows if it'll actually work? Gwen nodded. I hope it does. The two of them continued their small talk. But the conversation was over as quickly as it had begun. After Hawk finished his burger, they both stood up and cleared their trays. The subject of Dr. Connors's lab was closed. Others could move on, but Dr. Connors himself could not. Because at that very moment, Dr. Connors was living the reality of being abandoned by his investors. He stared at the man standing in his office, the man who had just delivered the board's latest decision. Have you made your decision, doctor? I don't understand. Doctor, I think you do. The man, a handsome, middle-aged executive in a tailored suit, smiled a warm, friendly smile. The military has pulled its funding. They used the word, temporarily, but we both know what that means. The board's initial recommendation was to suspend all funding to your lab. But, doctor, your latest results have bought you a reprieve. But only a reprieve. Dr. Connors's latest breakthrough, a single lab mouse that had successfully regenerated a limb, had given the board a glimmer of hope. But only a glimmer. Dr. Connors frowned. So what is the board's decision? Human trials. What? Dr. Connors's eyes went wide. I have only just extracted a potentially viable serum from that one mutated mouse. It hasn't even been properly tested yet. To move to human trials now is reckless. Besides, where would we even find volunteers? The executive shrugged. The military hospitals are full of potential subjects. We'll just tell them it's a new vaccine. He said it so casually. After all, it was standard procedure. Running human trials overseas cost money. But if you used your own underclass for experiments, you didn't have to pay them a dime. Bottom line. Are the poor even people? No. Capital chases profit. It demands maximum return for minimum cost. But Dr. Connors was horrified. I won't do it. Time is not on our side, doctor. You're running out of it. We all are. Quote. We. You don't need to know the details. You just need to know that the board is doing this for your own good. We'll have someone else handle the logistics. If it fails, you can just plead ignorance. I'm not here to negotiate with you, doctor. This is a notification. With that, the executive turned and walked out of Dr. Connors's lab. The rumor among the higher UPS was that Norman Osborn didn't have long. And Connors's regeneration project had been started for one reason, to find a cure for Norman's illness. The executive hadn't been lying. By pushing for human trials, they weren't just helping Dr. Connors, they were helping themselves. After all, a new king means a new court. Who knew what Harry Osborn would do once he took over? Everyone knows capitalism craves stability. Only in a stable environment can it reliably generate profit. But Dr. Connors was not a capitalist. He was a scientist. After the executive left, He sat down heavily in his office chair. And he didn't move for a very long time. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 20 comments 0 vote. 45 The birth of the lizard. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Dr. Connors's eyes. He sat motionless in his office chair, his face calm and composed, while inside a storm raged. One part of him was desperate to proceed with the human trials. This was his life's work. What was the point of all the research if not to benefit humanity, to ensure no one would ever have to suffer from a debilitating injury again? But the other part, the rational scientist, knew the truth: the regeneration serum was still unstable. To date, only one test subject, a single white mouse, had achieved the miraculous results he dreamed of after being injected. And that was the crux of the problem. They didn't know why it had worked. Yes, they had succeeded. But they couldn't replicate the success because they couldn't identify the variable that had made it possible. Medicine is a discipline of precision. It leaves no room for error. Especially when it comes to human trials. You don't proceed when you have a single question, let alone a complete mystery. Every doubt must be resolved. So, emotionally, no one wanted this to succeed more than he did. But logically, he knew that what the board was proposing was nothing short of monstrous. They were asking him to gamble with the lives of wounded soldiers. An angel and a devil materialized on his shoulders. The angel warned him that this was wrong, that if something went horribly awry, he would never be able to forgive himself. But the devil whispered that scientific progress demanded sacrifice. If this worked, his legacy would be eternal. He would save millions. Dr. Connors sat in his office, unmoving. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face. He sat there for hours, long after the sun had set and the city had gone dark. A text message chimed on his phone, jolting him from his trance. He grabbed the device and opened the new text message. It read, "Doctor, I'm on my way to the hospital now. We believe in you." He read the words, and his focus dissolved. The next second, he shot to his feet. A new, terrible resolve had taken hold. He strode out of his office, his face set in grim determination. The security camera in the corner of the lab watched silently. Its red light blinked rhythmically. With a soft chime, the lab's bioengineering splicer powered on. Dr. Connors removed a vial of green-hued serum. "I may not be an angel, but I will not be a devil." Dr. Connors stared at the vial in his hand, a fusion of the mutated serum extracted from that one successful mouse and the core reptilian DNA, and muttered the words to himself. His eyes hardened. He took the vial and sat down. A moment later, sitting on the stool, Dr. Connors looked at the syringe in his hand. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then, without another moment of hesitation, plunged the needle into the stump of his right arm, the arm he had lost in an accident years ago. He pushed the plunger all the way down. The instant he pulled the needle out, a wave of vertigo slammed into him without warning. Thud. Dr. Connors collapsed forward onto the lab table. At the same time, beneath the skin of his right stump, something began to stir, writhing as if it were trying to claw its way out. Manhattan, the Goring building. Was that a bug? No, a tiny lizard. Gwen, who had finished dinner and was back in her room, was on the phone with Hawk, telling him a funny story about how her 8-year-old brother had just been terrified by a lizard that had crawled in from somewhere. Hawk listened to her laugh. "You're not scared of them." "Hawk," Gwen said, her voice mock serious. "Have you forgotten? My entire summer internship was based on lizards. Our lab has more of them than it has lab rats." She was no damsel in distress. She was a scientist who could draw blood from a lizard without blinking and dissect a mouse without hesitation. "Right," Hawk chuckled. Gwen laughed with him, then changed the subject. "So, what about you? Have you eaten yet?" "Not yet." Hawk looked at the bucket of fried chicken he'd just bought. "I was about to go up to the roof and train. I'll eat after." The old gym had been torn down to make way for the new swimming pool. And the new gym was always packed, especially now at the start of the semester with all the new freshmen. So Hawk had decided to just train on his rooftop at night, then eat, shower, and sleep. Gwen listened to his plan, then a thought occurred to her. Hawk, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you still train every day? You're already so strong. As she spoke, an image flashed in her mind. Hawk, standing in the pool at the base of the waterfall, his body radiating a palpable heat. The inverted waterfall. She still didn't know for sure if he had been the one to do that. But she had no doubt that he could kill a bear with a single punch. She had seen it with her own eyes. That day, after she had found him, as they were hiking out of the forest, a bear had charged them. Hawk had killed it with one blow. The memory of it, the sheer, brutal power, still sent a shiver down her spine. As Gwen was lost in thought, Hawk considered her question. Why do I still train? 2. He paused. An image flashed in his own mind. To protect myself. And the people I care about. Does that include me? Gwen's voice was soft, but clear. Ever since that day, ever since she had forced him to take her phone and he hadn't refused, she felt like she had finally cracked the code, finally figured out how to talk to him. Hawk was taken aback by her directness. A small laugh escaped him, and then he nodded, his voice firm. Of course. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading.